America. The religious implications have added another layer to the controversy. Some Mormon scholars initially embraced the artifacts as supporting evidence for the Book of Mormon's claims about ancient Hebrew civilizations in America. When the Church later distanced itself from the relics, believers accused the academic establishment of anti-religious bias. They argued that scholars rejected the artifacts not on scientific grounds, but because they challenged accepted theories about American prehistory. Archaeological evidence has also been disputed. Believers claim that excavations at some discovery sites have revealed ancient hearths and tool fragments consistent with pre-Columbian settlement. They argue that the linguistic analysis was flawed, conducted by scholars unfamiliar with the unique conditions that isolated Hebrew communities might have developed over centuries in America. Recent computer analysis of the inscriptions they claim shows patterns too complex for 19th century forgers to have created. The psychological aspects of the hoax have raised additional questions. How did Scotford and Soper maintain their deception for nearly 3 decades? Some researchers suggest the two men may have genuinely believed in their discoveries, becoming victims of their own elaborate fantasy. Others proposed that additional conspirators were involved, creating a network of artifact planters across the Midwest that has never been fully exposed. Modern material analysis has added new dimensions to the debate. Microscopic examination of tool marks on the artifacts shows patterns consistent with late 19th century metalworking techniques, but defenders argue that similar marks could result from ancient tools made from meteoric iron, which was available to pre-Columbian peoples. Chemical analysis of the clay and stone used in the artifact suggests local Michigan sources, but supporters claim ancient peoples would have used available local materials. The financial motives behind the hoax have been well documented. Scotford and Soper sold thousands of artifacts to collectors and museums, earning substantial profits from their creations. Yet, believers argue that this commercial success proves the authenticity of at least some pieces. Would buyers have been so easily fooled if all the artifacts were obvious fakes? They suggest that genuine ancient artifacts may have inspired Scotford to create additional pieces, mixing real discoveries with manufactured ones. Today, most Michigan relics sit in museum storage or private collections labeled as 19th century curiosities rather than ancient treasures. But the questions they raised about ancient contact between old and new world civilizations continue to surface in new discoveries and theories. The debate over these artifacts reveals how easily evidence can be interpreted to support conflicting worldviews and how the line between genuine discovery and elaborate deception remains surprisingly difficult to establish. Long caves deep beneath the hills of eastern China lies one of Archae's most confounding puzzles. What began as a simple task on a summer day in 1992 would reveal something that shouldn't exist according to any historical record. 4 local farmers in Liu County, Judejiang Province, were dealing with an everyday problem: 5 small ponds on their land that needed draining. They had no idea they were about to stumble into chambers that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about ancient China. The farmers started their pumps and began removing water from the first pond. As the water level dropped, something strange appeared at the bottom. Instead of mud and rocks, they found carved stone steps leading downward into darkness. What they had discovered was an entrance to vast underground chambers that had been hidden beneath the water for centuries. When you descend into the first cavern, the scale becomes immediately overwhelming. You're standing inside a space that stretches 30 meters underground, with walls carved smooth as glass rising around you like the interior of a cathedral. The ceiling arches overhead in perfect symmetry, supported by massive stone pillars that seem to grow from the floor like ancient trees. Every surface shows the marks of careful craftsmanship. Parallel grooves running in precise patterns across the walls, creating a rhythm that draws your eye deeper into the chamber. These are not natural caves shaped by water and time. Every inch was carved by human hands from solid sandstone, creating rooms large enough to hold hundreds of people. Stone bridges span across carved pools. Gutters channel water along the floors. Narrow corridors connect chamber to chamber, like hallways in an underground palace. The engineering precision is breathtaking. Walls meet at perfect right angles. Floors lie completely level, and the structural support shows an understanding of weight distribution that rivals modern architecture. As investigations continued, the true scope of the discovery became clear. This wasn't just one hidden chamber. 24 separate caverns had been carved into Phoenix Hill, creating an underground complex covering over 30,000 m. Each chamber followed the same architectural principles, but with unique layouts and features. Some contained multiple levels connected by stone staircases. Others featured raised platforms and sunken areas that suggested specific functions now lost to history. The technical achievement represents something extraordinary in human engineering. Conservative estimates suggest that carving these chambers required removing nearly 1 million cub-m of solid rock. With the tools available 2,000 years ago, this would have demanded the coordinated effort of thousands of workers over many decades. Yet somehow this massive construction project vanished completely from the historical record. Chinese civilization is famous for its detailed documentation. Imperial records, local histories, and private writings have preserved accounts of far smaller construction projects throughout the country's long history. The Great Wall, major temples, imperial tombs, and countless other building efforts were carefully recorded by government officials and chroniclers. But the long caves appear in no ancient text, no imperial decree, no local legend passed down through generations. This absence of documentation has spawned numerous theories about the chamber's purpose and origins. Some researchers suggest they were secret military installations carved during times of political upheaval when rebel leaders needed hidden bases for training armies and storing weapons. The spaces would have been perfect for concealing large numbers of people away from imperial forces. Others proposed they served as massive underground storage facilities for grain, protecting food supplies during famines or sieges that periodically swept across ancient China. A different theory focuses on the religious and cultural practices of ancient Chinese society. The chambers might have been underground temples or ceremonial spaces dedicated to spiritual practices that required isolation from the outside world. The careful attention to architectural beauty suggests purposes beyond mere storage or military use. Perhaps they housed mystery schools or served as retreats for scholars and philosophers, seeking places for deep contemplation. The construction methods present their own puzzles. Examination of the carved surfaces reveals tool marks that suggest advanced techniques for shaping stone. The parallel grooves covering the walls show remarkable consistency, as if created by standardized tools operated by highly skilled craftsmen. No ancient tools have been found within the chambers, adding another layer to the mystery of how such precision was achieved with technology. From over 2 millennia ago, modern engineering analysis has revealed sophisticated solutions to problems that would challenge contemporary builders. The chambers maintain stable temperatures year-round without any apparent ventilation system. Water drainage follows carefully, planned channels that prevent flooding even during heavy rains. The structural design distributes weight so effectively that the chambers have remained intact, despite earthquakes and the passage of 2,000 years. Local folklore offers few clues about the chamber's origins. Unlike many archaeological sites in China, no oral traditions have survived that might explain who built these spaces or why. This silence suggests either that the construction was deliberately kept secret or that it predates the establishment of permanent settlements in the area. Some residents recall hearing vague stories about underground palaces, but these tales lack the specific details that might connect them to actual historical events. Recent investigations using ground-penetrating radar have revealed that more chambers likely remain undiscovered. Beneath Phoenix Hill, the full extent of this underground complex, maybe even larger than currently known. Each new chamber that is opened could provide fresh clues about the builder's identity and intentions, but so far, every discovery has only deepened the mystery rather than solving it. The long caves continue to attract researchers from multiple disciplines who hope to unlock their secrets. Geologists study the carving techniques. Archaeologists search for artifacts that might date the construction, and historians comb through ancient records, looking for any reference that might have been overlooked. Yet, after more than 30 years of investigation, these underground chambers guard their secrets as closely as they did when they lay hidden beneath those 5 small ponds. Windover bog bodies. Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries happen during the most ordinary moments. It was a warm spring morning in 1982 when backhoe operator Steve Vanderjagt was clearing mucky land for a new housing development called Windover Farms in Titusville, Florida. As his machine scooped up black peat from the bottom of a small pond, something pale caught his eye in the dark mud. What he thought was a rock turned out to be a human skull. And that single moment would rewrite what scientists thought they knew about ancient North America. Vanderjagt had stumbled upon something that shouldn't have been possible. Human remains don't survive for thousands of years, especially not in the humid climate of Florida, where heat and moisture quickly destroy organic material. Yet here was clear evidence of ancient burials preserved in perfect condition beneath the murky water of an unremarkable pond. The initial discovery led to emergency calls to local authorities and eventually to Florida State University archaeologist Glenn Doran. When Doran examined the bones that Vanni had uncovered, radiocarbon dating revealed an age that seemed impossible. These remains were between 7,000 and 8,000 years old. This made them older than Stonehenge, older than the Egyptian pyramids, and among the oldest well-preserved human remains ever found in North America. What started as a simple construction project became one of the most important archaeological excavations in American history. From 1984 to 1986, Doran and his team carefully excavated the small pond, working in the black peat bog that had preserved these ancient secrets. The scale of their discovery grew with each passing month. They weren't dealing with a few scattered bones, but with an entire cemetery containing the remains of 168 individuals, men, women, and children who had lived and died during the Middle Archaic period. The timeline of discoveries at Windover challenged everything archaeologists thought they understood about prehistoric North America. Each season of excavation revealed new surprises that pushed back the boundaries of what was considered possible for ancient peoples. The preservation was so extraordinary that brain tissue remained intact inside several skulls after nearly 8 millennia. This organic material became the source of the oldest DNA ever recovered in North America, opening a window into the genetic heritage of the continent's earliest inhabitants. As the excavations progressed, the team made discoveries that revolutionized understanding of Middle Archaic culture. Woven textiles found wrapped around some of the bodies proved to be the oldest known fabrics in North America. These weren't crude attempts at weaving, but sophisticated textiles created using complex techniques that demonstrated advanced knowledge of fiber arts. The fabric showed that people living 7,000 years ago had mastered skills that historians had believed developed much later. The chronological revelations continued as researchers analyzed wooden artifacts found alongside the burials. Stakes driven into the pond bottom had been used to hold bodies in place during burial ceremonies. Some of these wooden stakes contained tool marks that preserved evidence of the specific techniques used to shape them. Bottle gourds found in burial contexts were directly dated to 7,290 years ago, providing the oldest evidence for gourd use in the southeastern United States. Each new discovery at Windover forced archaeologists to reconsider their timeline for cultural development in prehistoric North America. The site proved that complex burial practices existed far earlier than previously thought. Bodies had been carefully wrapped in textiles and weighted down with stakes to submerge them in the pond. This wasn't simply disposal of the dead, but elaborate mortuary rituals that required community cooperation and cultural traditions, passed down through generations. The DNA analysis from Windover brain tissue created new controversies about the peopling of the Americas. Genetic material showed connections to both Asian populations and later Native American groups. But the relationships were more complex than simple, migration models suggested. Some researchers argued that the Windover people represented an early population, distinct from the ancestors of most modern Native Americans, while others maintained they fit within existing theories about human migration patterns. Modern dating techniques applied to Windover materials have refined the timeline, but also raised new questions. The burials occurred over approximately 1,000 years, from about 8,000 to 7,000 years ago. This extended use of the site suggested that multiple generations returned to the same pond for burial ceremonies, creating a sacred landscape that maintained its importance across centuries. The consistency of burial practices over this long period indicated stable cultural traditions and sophisticated social organization. Recent technological advances continue to reveal new aspects of the Windover chronology. Advanced DNA sequencing techniques are extracting more genetic information from the preserved tissue, while improved radiocarbon methods are providing more precise dates for individual artifacts. Ground-penetrating radar has identified additional burial areas that remain unexcavated, suggesting that future work might expand the timeline even further. The implications of Windover's chronological revelations extend far beyond archaeology. The site demonstrates that wetland preservation can maintain organic materials for millennia under the right conditions, offering hope that other bog sites might yield similar discoveries. The advanced cultural practices documented at Windover suggest that Middle Archaic peoples had more complex societies than previously, recognized with established traditions for textile production, woodworking and ceremonial activities that lasted for generations. Acamaro figurinins. In a small pottery workshop in central Mexico, something impossible was being created. Not just one impossible thing, but tens of thousands of them. Small clay figures emerged from the earth around Acaro, Mexico, each one carefully crafted and fired. But these weren't ordinary artifacts. These figurines showed humans living alongside creatures that science insists died out 65 million years before the first human walked the earth. The story begins in 1944 when Waldemar Uhlrud, a German immigrant and amateur archaeologist, hired a local farmer named Odilon Tinerero to dig for artifacts near El Toro mountain. What Tinero brought back that first day stopped Uhlrud in his tracks. The clay figure depicted a human figure riding what appeared to be a dinosaur. For every additional artifact Tinero found, Uhlrud paid him 1 peso. This simple arrangement would eventually yield over 33,000 figurines. The collection defied everything scientists thought they knew about prehistoric life. Here were detailed sculptures of stegosaurs with their distinctive back plates, long-necked sauropods, fierce carnivores with massive teeth, and flying pterosaurs, but these weren't museum pieces showing dinosaurs in isolation. These figures portrayed an impossible world where humans and dinosaurs lived together. Some showed people riding on dinosaur backs. Others depicted humans feeding these massive creatures or even playing musical instruments beside them. The figurines weren't crude or simple. Many displayed remarkable detail and artistic skill. The dinosaur anatomy was surprisingly accurate, showing features that paleontologists had only recently discovered in fossil remains. The human figures wore clothing and jewelry consistent with ancient Mesoamerican cultures. Some pieces stood several feet tall and would have required considerable time and effort to create. When word spread about Uhlrud's discovery, scientists rushed to examine the collection. What they found created a scientific crisis. If authentic, these figurines would overturn fundamental principles of geology, paleontology, and evolutionary biology. Dinosaurs and humans, separated by millions of years, could not have coexisted. The entire framework of Earth's history would need to be rewritten. The first attempts at scientific dating produced startling results. In 1968, Charles Hapgood, a professor at Keene State College, sent samples to Isotopes Incorporated in New Jersey for radiocarbon testing. The results showed dates ranging from 0 to 4,500 years ago, placing the figurines well within human history. Additional thermoluminescence tests in 1972 suggested the ceramic pieces were fired between 2,500 and 6,500 years ago. These dating results should have been impossible. Every principle of modern science indicated that dinosaurs vanished from Earth long before humans appeared. Yet, here was physical evidence suggesting otherwise, backed by scientific testing methods that archaeologists relied upon worldwide. The figures weren't isolated finds that could be dismissed as anomalies. They numbered in the tens of thousands, forming a massive collection that would have required years to create. Critics immediately challenged the findings. Charles Dio from the Amarind Foundation traveled to Akamaro and concluded the figurines were modern fakes. He pointed out that the figures showed no signs of aging that would be expected from ancient ceramics. The surfaces were too clean, lacking the mineral deposits and weathering patterns typical of archaeological artifacts. Depes also noted that many figurines depicted dinosaur species only recently identified by paleontologists, raising questions about how ancient artisans could have known such details. The controversy deepened when investigators examined the discovery site. Unlike legitimate archaeological excavations, the Akamaro figures came from scattered locations around the town with no clear stratigraphy or contextual dating. This randomness violated basic archaeological principles and made independent verification nearly impossible. The rapid rate of discovery also raised suspicions. Authentic artifacts typically emerged slowly from carefully controlled digs, not by the thousands in a matter of years. Defenders of the figurines argued. They discovered that some denizen populations had been separated from each other for hundreds of thousands of years, suggesting these people had spread across vast distances and evolved into distinct groups. Scientists began tracing the genetic legacy of Denisovans in modern populations, uncovering evidence of their remarkable adaptations. Tibetan people inherited a gene variant from Denisovan that helps them survive at high altitudes by efficiently using oxygen in thin mountain air. Pacific Islanders received genes that may have helped their ancestors survive in tropical disease environments. The DNA of these vanished people continues to help their descendants thrive in challenging environments today. New discoveries keep expanding the denizen mystery. In 2019, researchers found a denizen jawbone in a cave on the Tibetan plateau, proving these people had spread far beyond their Siberian homeland. In 2021, they identified denizen DNA in sediment from caves across Asia, showing these ancient humans had lived in many locations where no bones have been found. Huffington White Horse, carved into a hillside in Oxfordshire, England. A massive figure stretches across the landscape like a prehistoric mystery frozen in white chalk. The Huffington White Horse measures 360 ft from nose to tail, its abstract form visible from miles away across the Tempames Valley. Unlike the rolling green hills that surround it, this ancient image stands out in brilliant white against the dark earth. Created by cutting deep trenches into the hillside and filling them with crushed chalk. For over 3,000 years, this enigmatic figure has gazed across the English countryside. Yet its true purpose remains as mysterious today as when it was first carved during the Bronze Age. The earliest written record of the White Horse appears in documents from the 1070s, when Saxon charters mention White Horse Hill as a local landmark. By the 12th century, medieval scribes included the figure among the wonders of Britain alongside Stonehenge and other ancient marvels. These early references tell us that the horse was already ancient by medieval times, but they offer no clues about who created it or why. The figure had become so embedded in local geography that people simply accepted its presence without questioning its origins. Throughout the medieval period, the white horse required constant maintenance to prevent grass and weeds from covering the bright chalk. Local communities organized scourings every few years where dozens of people would gather to clean and restore the figure. The first documented scouring took place in 1681, but this tradition almost certainly stretched back centuries earlier. These community gatherings became festivals with food, music, and games celebrating the ancient monument. The regular maintenance meant that the horse's appearance could change over time as different generations interpreted and reshaped its form. For centuries, most scholars assumed the white horse was relatively recent, perhaps created during the Saxon or medieval periods. The figure's stylized appearance seemed too abstract to be truly ancient, and many believed that prehistoric peoples lacked the organizational skills needed for such a massive project. The horse was often attributed to Alfred the Great, who supposedly commemorated his victory over the Danes at the nearby Battle of Ashdown in 871 AD. This theory satisfied Victorian historians who preferred to connect ancient monuments to well-known historical events. The chronological revolution began in the 1990s when archaeologists conducted the first scientific excavations at the site using ground-penetrating radar and careful excavation techniques. They discovered that the horse's original shape differed significantly from its current form. The prehistoric figure was more compact and had a different head position. Over centuries of rescarring, local communities had gradually altered the horse's appearance, unknowingly changing an ancient artwork through well-meaning maintenance. The breakthrough came when researchers applied optically stimulated luminescence dating to soil samples taken from beneath the horse. This technique measures when quartz grains in the sediment were last exposed to sunlight, providing dates for when the original trenches were dug. The results revolutionized understanding of the monument's age. Instead of being medieval or Saxon, the white horse dated to between 1400 and 600 BC, firmly placing its creation in the Bronze Age or Early Iron Age. This new timeline transformed theories about the horse's purpose and meaning. Bronze Age. Britain was a period of significant cultural change where new religious beliefs and artistic styles were spreading across Europe. The horse emerged as a powerful symbol during this era, associated with speed, warfare, and divine power. Celtic cultures that developed later would worship horse goddesses like Aona, but the Uffington horse predated these traditions by centuries, suggesting even earlier sacred associations with horses. Archaeological evidence from the surrounding landscape supported the new dating. Bronze Age boreros and settlements dotted the area around White Horse Hill, creating a sacred landscape where the massive horse figure would have served as a focal point for religious ceremonies. The nearby Iron Age hill fort of Huffington Castle, built several centuries after the horse, may have been positioned to protect or control access to the ancient monument. Recent investigations have refined the chronology even further while raising new questions about the horse's evolution. Advanced dating techniques applied in the 2020s suggest the figure may be even older than previously thought, possibly dating to 1500 BC or earlier. Ground-penetrating radar has revealed that the horse may have undergone multiple major alterations in prehistoric times, not just during later scourings. This suggests that ancient communities also modified the figure, perhaps adapting it to changing religious beliefs or artistic styles. The discovery of the horse's true age has intensified debates about its original appearance and meaning. Computer modeling based on archaeological evidence suggests the prehistoric horse looked quite different from today's version, with a more compact body and possibly different leg positions. Some researchers argue that the original figure may not have been a horse at all, but rather a different animal or even an abstract symbol that communities gradually transformed into a horse shape over millennia. Labrata pits anomalies. In the heart of Los Angeles, where modern highways cross and skyscrapers cast shadows over a busy urban landscape, millions of fossil bones lie entombed in pools of natural asphalt. The Labrada tar pits have been trapping animals for over 50,000 years, creating what should be one of the most straightforward fossil records on Earth. Yet, the more scientists examine this prehistoric graveyard, the more they discover patterns that seem to defy the basic rules of ecology and evolution. The evidence preserved in these sticky black pools presents a scientific paradox that challenges everything we thought we knew about how ancient ecosystems functioned and how species became extinct. The first anomaly appears when researchers count the bones. In any normal ecosystem, herbivores vastly outnumber carnivores because energy transfers up the food chain become increasingly inefficient. A healthy environment might support one predator for every 10 or 20 plant-eating animals, but the La Brea fossils tell a completely different story. Of the over 1 million specimens recovered from the tar pits, an astonishing 90% belong to carnivores. Saber-toothed cats outnumber their supposed prey by ratios that should make survival impossible for either group. This inverted ecosystem becomes even stranger when scientists examine exactly which predators dominate the fossil record. Dire wolves account for thousands of individual specimens, making them the most common large mammal found in the pits. These pack hunters should require enormous herds of prey animals to sustain their populations. Yet the bones of horses, camels, and bison appear in far smaller numbers. The mathematical impossibility of this predator-heavy community has puzzled researchers for decades, leading to increasingly complex theories about how the tar pits functioned as death traps. The traditional explanation suggests that herbivores became stuck in the asphalt first, attracting waves of carnivores that also became trapped while trying to feed on the helpless prey. This carnivore trap theory accounts for the unusual ratios by proposing that each herbivore victim could attract multiple predators over time. However, recent analysis of the fossil distribution reveals patterns that contradict this simple model. Many carnival remains show no evidence of being attracted to existing carcasses, and the preservation conditions suggest that animals became trapped during different seasons and circumstances. Even more puzzling is the remarkable condition of many fossils preserved in the asphalt. Unlike other fossil sites, where bones become scattered and fragmented over thousands of years, Labra specimens often remain in near-perfect articulation. Complete skeletons lie undisturbed in positions that suggest rapid burial and protection from scavengers. The asphalt has preserved not just bones, but also soft tissues, fur, feathers, and even the stomach contents of some animals. This level of preservation rivals that found in amber or frozen specimens. Yet it occurred in an active, dynamic environment where new animals were constantly being added to the deposits. The temporal mixing of fossils creates another layer of scientific mystery. Radioarbon dating reveals that bones found in the same asphalt deposits can differ in age by thousands of years. A saber-toothed cat skull might lie directly next to a direwolf femur that lived 5,000 years earlier, both perfectly preserved as if they died simultaneously. This chronological mixing suggests that the tar pits were not simple death traps, but complex environments where older remains could be re-exposed and mixed with newer specimens through unknown geological processes. Perhaps most troubling for conventional paleontology is the discovery of extinct species combinations that should never have coexisted. Fossils from different climate periods appear together in single deposits, including animals adapted to both glacial and interglacial conditions. The bones of tropical species lie alongside those of cold weather specialists, creating ecological assemblages that contradict everything known about Pleiadian climate changes and species migrations. These impossible communities suggest either that the dating methods are fundamentally flawed or that the tar pits preserved animals across much longer time periods than previously thought. Recent analysis of plant remains and insect fossils has deepened the puzzle by revealing equally impossible botanical communities. seeds and pollen from different climate zones appear in the same asphalt layers, indicating that vastly different plant communities somehow existed simultaneously in the Los Angeles basin. These botanical impossibilities mirror the animal anomalies and suggest that the tar pits might preserve evidence of rapid environmental changes that occurred too quickly for conventional geological processes to explain. The preservation of complete food webs presents another challenge to establish scientific understanding. Normally, fossil sites preserve only fragments of ancient ecosystems, with most small animals and plants disappearing from the geological record. But Labra has yielded everything, from massive mammoths to tiny beetles, creating an unnaturally complete picture of Plian life. This comprehensive preservation includes species that should have lived in completely different habitats, from wetland specialists to desert-adapted forms, all apparently thriving in the same location. Berakman. The morning heat rises from the Perk River as it winds through Malaysia's Langgong Valley, just as it has for thousands of years. Along the riverbanks, limestone hills emerge from the dense tropical forest, their weathered faces dotted with dark cave openings that have sheltered human life since the earliest days of our species. This valley holds secrets that stretch back 2 million years, making it one of the most important archaeological sites in Southeast Asia. But it was here in 1991 that researchers would uncover something that would change our understanding of who lived in this region. 11,000 years ago, Dr. Zarina Majid from the University of Science Malaysia had been excavating caves in the Langgong Valley throughout the 1980s. The limestone caves along the Perak River had already yielded stone tools, pottery fragments, and evidence of continuous human occupation spanning thousands of years. But when her team began working at Guagun Runu, a cave tucked into the hills above the river, they were searching for more clues about how early people lived in this tropical environment. The cave entrance opens like a natural doorway in the limestone cliff face. Inside, the temperature drops several degrees from the tropical heat outside. Water drips steadily from the cave ceiling, the sound echoing in the darkness. The floor consists of layers of sediment that have accumulated over millennia, deposits of clay, stone debris, and organic material that preserve the story of everyone who ever sheltered within these walls. As the excavation progressed deeper into the cave floor, the team began finding the usual archaeological evidence. Stone tools appeared in the sediment layers, crafted from river pebbles and shaped into cutting implements. Animal bones showed up regularly, remains of meals from long-ago hunting expeditions. Then, at a depth that indicated great age, something extraordinary emerged from the earth. First, they uncovered pieces of human bone, a jaw fragment, then part of a skull. As the careful excavation continued, more bones appeared, positioned in a way that suggested this was not scattered remains, but a deliberate burial. Working with brushes and dental picks, the team slowly revealed a complete human skeleton lying on its side in a fetal position. His bones were stained dark brown from thousands of years in the cave soil, but they were remarkably well preserved in the constant temperature and humidity of the limestone cave. Radioarbon dating of the skeleton revealed its incredible age, over 11,000 years old, making it the oldest and most complete human skeleton ever discovered in Southeast Asia. The researchers named their find Perk Man after the state where he was found. But as they studied the bones more closely, they realized this ancient individual had a story unlike any other prehistoric human ever discovered. Perk Man had been born with a rare congenital condition called brachymyophalangia, which affected the development of his finger and toe bones. His hands and feet were noticeably different from normal human anatomy. This physical difference would have been obvious from birth and would have affected his ability to grip objects and walk normally. Yet the evidence suggested he had lived a full adult life, reaching approximately 40 years of age, in a time when surviving to that age required considerable skill and community support. The the burial itself revealed remarkable details about how this prehistoric community treated someone who was physically different. Perkman had not been discarded or abandoned because of his disability. Instead, he was buried with great care and respect. Stone tools were placed near his body, carefully crafted implements that would have been valuable possessions in his society. Animal bones from his final meal lay nearby, along with freshwater shells that may have held symbolic meaning for his people. Analysis of his skeleton showed that despite his physical challenges, Perkman had lived an active life. His muscle attachment points indicated he had been physically strong, suggesting he found ways to contribute to his community's survival. His teeth showed wear patterns consistent with a diet of roots, nuts, and meat, typical of hunter-gatherer societies in tropical Southeast Asia. There was no evidence of malnutrition or neglect. This was someone who had been cared for throughout his life. The skull features identified Perkman as belonging to the Australian Malinoid population, early peoples who migrated through Southeast Asia tens of thousands of years ago. These were the ancestors of today's Aboriginal Australians and Melanesian peoples, groups who possessed the seafaring skills needed to cross the water barriers between Southeast Asia and Australia during the last ice age. Perkman's discovery provided the first clear physical evidence of these ancient peoples. Living in Peninsular Malaysia, the stone tools found with Perkman belonged to a sophisticated toolkit used by hunter-gatherers who understood how to work with the available materials in their environment. River pebbles had been carefully shaped into scrapers, cutting tools, and pointed implements. The quality of the workmanship suggested these people had developed effective techniques for surviving in the tropical forest environment of ancient Malaysia. But questions surrounding Perkman continue to challenge archaeologists. How did his community view his physical differences? Was he perhaps considered special because of his unique appearance, possibly holding a spiritual role within the group? The careful burial suggests he was valued and respected, but the exact nature of his position in society remains unknown. The discovery also raises broader questions about the diversity of early human populations in Southeast Asia. If communities 11,000 years ago were caring for individuals with physical disabilities, what does this tell us about their social structures and cultural values? The evidence suggests these were not simple survival-focused groups, but communities with complex relationships and sophisticated understanding of human worth beyond physical capability. Clark's Dorp spheres. When South African miners first pulled these metallic spheres from deep underground excavations in the 1980s, mainstream geology had a perfectly reasonable explanation ready. These were natural concretions formed billions of years ago when mineral-rich water moved through layers of volcanic sediment. As the water evaporated, it left behind spherical deposits of pyrite and other minerals, creating the round objects that miners kept finding in the ancient rock formations around Clark. Simple chemistry, basic geology, nothing unusual at all. Professional geologists examined the spheres and confirmed this straightforward interpretation. The objects were found in pyrrolite, deposits that formed from volcanic ash and sediments roughly 3 billion years ago during the Precambrian era. Heat and pressure over geological time had transformed these ancient layers into metamorphic rock, preserving the mineral concretions within them. Similar formations occur in many parts of the world where ancient volcanic activity created the right conditions for mineral precipitation. Case closed. Mystery solved. But then museum curator Rolf Marx began making claims that challenged this comfortable scientific consensus. Marx, who oversaw many of the spheres housed at the Clark's Museum, described properties that seemed impossible for natural rock formations. According to Marx, some spheres appeared to be perfectly round with precise grooves carved around their circumference. Even more remarkably, he claimed that at least one sphere rotated slowly on its own axis while locked in a vibration-free display case, completing one full rotation every few hours without any external force. Development didn't follow the linear progression taught in textbooks. Advanced metallurgy, sophisticated engineering, and complex manufacturing techniques appear in the archaeological record much earlier than mainstream science acknowledges. The king god nail fits this pattern of anomalous evidence that challenges conventional chronology. The quarry itself held other unusual findings. Workers reported discovering tool marks on stone surfaces deep within formations that supposedly predated human existence. These marks showed clear evidence of metal tools rather than natural erosion or animal activity. The combination of manufactured objects and worked stone surfaces suggested significant human activity at the site during periods when humans allegedly didn't exist. Scientific institutions have a vested interest in maintaining their established timeline of human development. Academic careers, research funding, and institutional credibility depend on supporting the accepted narrative. When evidence emerges that contradicts this narrative, the response typically involves dismissing the evidence rather than questioning the theory. The Kingudi artifact disappeared from scientific discussion shortly after Brewster's initial report. No follow-up investigations were conducted. No additional testing was performed. The nail simply vanished from academic consideration, along with the uncomfortable questions it raised about human antiquity. This pattern of suppression repeats throughout the historical record. Anomalous artifacts that suggest advanced ancient civilizations are consistently overlooked, misclassified, or forgotten by mainstream archaeology. The evidence accumulates, but the interpretation remains unchanged because acknowledging these discoveries would require completely restructuring our understanding of human history. Giant skeletons. Flip through the pages of a 19th century newspaper and you'll stumble across some of the strangest headlines in American journalism. Right there, between advertisements for patent medicines and reports from the latest political scandals, you'll find stories that sound like they belong in a different world entirely. Giant skeleton discovered in Ohio mound. 18 to human remains found in Tennessee. Ancient race of giants unearthed in Wisconsin. The stories follow a familiar pattern. Workers are digging somewhere, building a railroad, excavating a foundation, clearing farmland. Their shovels hit something unexpected. Not rocks or roots, but bones. Big bones. Human bones. Much bigger than any human bone should be. The New York Times, December 20th, 1897. 3 burial mounds on a farm in Maple Creek, Wisconsin, have been found to contain the skeletons of a giant race. The skeletons are well preserved and of great size. The femur measuring 26 in length, indicating a height of over 8 ft. The discoveries aren't limited to one region. Reports pour in from across the American landscape. Ohio, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, California. Each story describes similar findings. Unusually large skeletal remains often discovered in ancient burial mounds, frequently accompanied by artifacts suggesting these were people of importance in their communities. Local newspapers treat these discoveries as legitimate archaeological finds. The New York Times, considered America's newspaper of record, publishes dozens of these stories between 1870 and 1920. The accounts include details that suggest serious investigation, measurements, witness names, descriptions of the excavation sites. In 1891, the New York Times reports on a discovery at Buzzards Bay, Massachusetts, where actor Joseph Jefferson found the skeleton of a man that filled them with astonishment from its great size while renovating his summer property. The paper describes the remains as being found in undisturbed earth, suggesting great age. The Ohio Historical Society documents multiple giant skeleton discoveries across the state. In Miami, workers uncovered remains that measured over 8 ft tall. In Ross County, excavations revealed skeletons. Described as 7 to 8 ft in stature, each discovery followed proper archaeological procedures for the time, with local officials and sometimes university researchers examining the remains. But here's where the story takes an interesting turn. By the 1920s, these reports begin to disappear from newspapers. The last major account appears in the New York Times in 1923, describing the discovery of an Indian giant skeleton in Ohio. After that, nothing. The regular stream of giant skeleton discoveries that had filled American newspapers for 50 years simply stops. Modern researchers who investigate these historical accounts face an immediate problem. Where did all these skeletons go? If 19th century America was finding giant human remains on such a regular basis, where are they now? What happened to the physical evidence? Some point to the Smithsonian Institution. Many of the newspaper accounts mentioned that discovered skeletons were sent to the Smithsonian for further study. The institution had researchers working across the country during this period, collecting artifacts and specimens from Native American sites. If anyone would have extensive records of giant skeleton discoveries, it would be the Smithsonian. But the Smithsonian's official position is clear. They have no record of receiving or studying human remains of unusual size from this period. Their archives contain thousands of Native American skeletal remains collected during the 19th and early 20th centuries, but none showing evidence of the extreme heights described in newspaper accounts. This discrepancy fuels speculation. Some researchers suggest a deliberate cover-up, arguing that evidence of giant humans contradicts accepted theories about human evolution and American prehistory. They point to the abrupt end of newspaper reports as evidence of institutional suppression. Others look more carefully at the newspaper accounts themselves. Reading these stories with a critical eye reveals some interesting patterns. Many descriptions use identical language, suggesting reporters were copying from other sources rather than investigating firsthand. Key details often remain vague. Exact locations aren't specified. Witness names are omitted. Measurements aren't independently verified. The excavation techniques of the 1890s also raise questions about accuracy. Most discoveries were made by amateur diggers, farmers, construction workers, curiosity seekers. These weren't trained archaeologists using precise measurement tools. A 6F skeleton might easily appear much larger when excavated without proper reference points or documentation. Newspaper editors of this era had different standards for verification than we expect today. Sensational stories sold papers, and readers had limited ways to fact-check unusual claims. A report from a remote Ohio farm might travel through several newspapers before reaching the New York Times with details, changing along the way. Medical knowledge about human growth disorders was also limited in the 19th century. People suffering from gigantism or acromegaly, conditions that can produce individuals over 7 ft tall, were less understood than today. The discovery of remains from someone with these conditions might seem more mysterious to 19th century observers than it would to modern researchers. Some apparent giant skeletons had simpler explanations. The 1846 report from Tennessee, initially described as an 18T human, was later revealed to be mastodon bones arranged to resemble a human skeleton. Similar cases of misidentification appear in other accounts when investigators took a second look. The geological context of these discoveries also matters. Many reported giant skeletons came from areas where natural processes could scatter and rearrange bones from multiple individuals. A collection of bones from several people mixed together over centuries might appear to come from one unusually large individual. However, dismissing all these accounts requires ignoring some puzzling aspects. The sheer number of reports, over 1,000 documented cases, suggests something was being discovered regularly. The consistent geographic patterns concentrated in areas with ancient Native American burial mounds point to a real archaeological phenomenon. Even if the interpretation was incorrect, modern DNA analysis of 19th century skeletal remains from these regions might provide answers. But most of the physical evidence described in newspaper accounts has vanished, whether destroyed, misplaced, or never properly preserved in the first place. The bones that could settle this mystery are no longer available for examination. What remains are the newspaper clippings, faded photographs of excavation sites, and the persistent question of what 19th century Americans were actually finding in those burial mounds. Low-lay footprints. Picture this. You're walking across wet concrete. Your footsteps sink slightly into the surface, leaving perfect impressions behind. Now imagine that concrete hardens permanently, preserving those prints for millions of years. That's essentially what happened at Lee, Tanzania 3.6 million years ago, except instead of concrete, it was volcanic ash from a nearby eruption. In 1976, paleoanthropologist Mary Leakey was leading a fossil hunting expedition in northern Tanzania. The team had been working the area for decades, picking through layers of ancient sediment in search of bones and tools. But on this particular day, team member Peter Jones made a discovery that would reshape our understanding of human evolution. He found footprints, not just any footprints, ancient footprints pressed into hardened volcanic ash, preserved like a snapshot from the deep past. The circumstances of preservation were remarkable. Sadaman volcano had erupted, covering the landscape with a fine layer of ash. This ash, mixed with water, perhaps from a brief rainstorm, these extraordinary claims attracted international attention from researchers looking for evidence that intelligent beings had existed on Earth far earlier than conventional science accepted. If the spheres were indeed 3 billion years old and showed signs of artificial manufacture, they would prove that advanced technology existed when Earth's atmosphere still lacked oxygen and only primitive bacteria inhabited the planet. The implications would revolutionize our understanding of both geological time and the development of life. Independent investigators began examining the spheres with fresh eyes, looking for evidence that might have been missed by conventional geological analysis. They pointed to features that seemed too regular for natural formation. Many spheres showed symmetrical grooves running around their circumference like machined components. Others appeared to be made of metal alloys that shouldn't occur naturally in such pure concentrations. The precision of some specimens suggested manufacturing techniques rather than random chemical processes. Proponents of the artificial theory argued that mainstream scientists were dismissing the spheres too quickly because they contradicted established geological principles. They suggested that the academic establishment had a vested interest in maintaining current theories about Earth's early history and would reject any evidence that threatened these fundamental assumptions. The spheres represented exactly the kind of anomalous data that scientific institutions typically ignored or explained away to preserve existing paradigms. The rotation claims became particularly contentious as they spread through alternative archaeology networks. If spheres were indeed moving on their own, it suggested some kind of internal mechanism or energy source that had remained active for billions of years. This would require technology far beyond anything modern science could produce, implying that whoever created these objects possessed capabilities that made current human achievements seem primitive by comparison. However, when geologist Paul Heinrich conducted detailed investigations of the spheres in the 1990s, his findings contradicted many of the extraordinary claims. Heinrich's analysis showed that the spheres were neither perfectly round nor made of unusual metal alloys. Instead, they displayed the irregular shapes and mineral compositions expected from natural concretions. The supposed precision grooves were actually natural fracture lines and weathering patterns common in pyrite. Formations exposed to groundwater over geological time. Heinrich also investigated the rotation claims by contacting Marx directly and examining the museum's documentation. He found no evidence that any sphere had ever rotated under controlled observation conditions. Marxist statements had been misinterpreted and exaggerated as they spread through popular media, transforming vague impressions about subtle movements into definitive claims about autonomous rotation. When Heinrich examined the actual spheres in their display cases, he observed no movement whatsoever. Chemical analysis supported Heinrich's conclusions about the sphere's natural origins. The objects consisted primarily of pyrite, hematite, and other iron minerals commonly found in metamorphic rock formations. Their internal structure showed the crystalline patterns typical of minerals that precipitated slowly from solution rather than the uniform composition expected from manufactured materials. X-ray analysis revealed no hidden mechanisms. or unusual elements that might explain anomalous properties. Yet supporters of the artificial theory continue to challenge these debunking efforts, arguing that conventional scientists are using outdated analytical methods and biased assumptions. They claim that more sophisticated testing might reveal manufacturing signatures that previous investigations missed. Some researchers suggest that the spheres represent technology so advanced that our current scientific instruments cannot properly analyze their construction methods or operating principles. The debate has expanded beyond questions of natural versus artificial origin to encompass broader issues about scientific methodology and institutional. Biased critics argue that mainstream academia automatically rejects evidence that challenges fundamental theories, while defenders counter that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence that has never been provided. The Clark's-Dorp spheres have become symbols in a larger conflict between conventional science and alternative archaeology. AIUD wedge. Picture this scene. It's 1974 and construction workers are digging along the muddy banks of the Moose River near AIUD, Romania. Their job is simple. Dig a trench for a new building project. But as their shovels bite into the sandy earth 35 ft down, they hit something unexpected. Not rocks, not pipes, something else entirely. The first thing they pull up catches their attention right away. Mastodon bones. Huge ancient bones from creatures that died out thousands of years ago. The workers gather around examining these prehistoric remains. But then one of them notices something else glinting in the dirt nearby. Something that doesn't belong with ancient bones. It's a wedge-shaped piece of metal about 8 in long, 5 in wide, weighs around 4 lb. The surface shows signs of wear and corrosion like it's been buried for a very long time. But here's the problem. It's made of aluminum. The workers don't immediately understand why this is strange. They bag up the bones and the metal object, send everything to the local museum for examination. That's when the mystery really begins. Dr. Radufti examines the objects at the Natural History Museum, includes that lived between 10,000 and 80,000 years ago. Standard prehistoric remains, nothing unusual there. But the metal wedge tells a different story. Initial tests confirm it's aluminum. Not just any aluminum, but a complex alloy containing several metals mixed together. The composition matches modern industrial aluminum, the kind used in aircraft and heavy machinery. Here's where the detective work gets interesting. Aluminum in its pure form wasn't produced by humans until 1824. Before that, aluminum was more precious than gold because nobody knew how to extract it from ore. The industrial process that makes aluminum cheap and common only started in the 1880s. So, how does an aluminum object end up buried next to mastodon bones that died out thousands of years before humans could even make aluminum? The mystery deepens when researchers look at the wedge's shape and structure. It's not decorative. It's not ceremonial. It looks functional like a tool or part of a larger machine. The metal shows stress patterns indicating it was used for something that required strength and durability. Word spreads about the discovery. Researchers from different fields examine the object. Some suggest it might be evidence of advanced ancient technology. Others propose it came from time travelers or extraterrestrial visitors. The wedge develops a reputation as one of Romania's most puzzling archaeological finds. But experienced investigators know to look for simpler explanations first. They examine the excavation site more carefully. They study the geological layers where the object was found. They research the area's industrial history. The Moose River region has a long history of mining and construction. During the 20th century, various excavation projects used heavy machinery in the area. Mining companies, construction firms, and government projects all operated equipment near the river. Some investigators focus on the wedge's specific shape and wear patterns. It resembles components used in large excavation equipment. Specifically, it looks very similar to a tooth from an excavator bucket. The kind of part that would be made from durable aluminum alloy to withstand heavy use. When excavator teeth break or wear out, they're usually replaced on site. The old parts might be discarded or left behind. In a muddy construction environment, a heavy piece of metal could easily sink into soft ground and become buried. The aluminum's corroded appearance doesn't necessarily indicate great age. Aluminum oxidizes quickly when exposed to moisture and soil conditions. The patina that makes it look ancient could develop in just a few decades underground. Further investigation reveals that the excavation site wasn't pristine when the workers found the wedge. The area had been disturbed multiple times by previous construction projects. Soil layers had been mixed and redistributed. This mixing could explain how a relatively modern aluminum part ended up in the same layer as much older mastodon bones. The mastodon bones themselves provide another clue. They weren't found in their original position. These bones had been moved and redeposited by water action and human activity over time. The same processes that moved the bones could have moved the aluminum wedge. Metallurgical analysis of the wedge shows it's made from 2000 series duralumin, an aluminum alloy developed in the early 1900s. This material is commonly used in aircraft, automotive, and heavy machinery applications. It's exactly what you'd expect to find in industrial equipment from the mid-10th century. The investigation takes another turn when researchers examine similar objects. Excavator bucket teeth made from aluminum alloy show identical wear patterns and corrosion. The size, weight, and composition match almost perfectly. Mining operations in Romania during the 1960s and early 1970s used exactly this type of equipment. Aluminum components were preferred in certain mining environments because aluminum doesn't create sparks, making it safer around combustible materials. As the Romanian economy changed, much of this mining equipment was sold, scrapped, or abandoned. Parts ended up scattered across construction sites where the machinery had been used for final projects before being decommissioned. The workers who found the wedge weren't archaeologists. They didn't document the exact position of each object or carefully map the excavation layers. This lack of precise documentation makes it impossible to verify that the aluminum wedge and mastodon bones were actually deposited at the same time. London hammer. Sometimes the most ordinary walks reveal the most extraordinary puzzles. It's a warm June day in 1936 and Max Hahn is strolling with his wife Emma along Red Creek near London, Texas. They're following a familiar path beside a waterfall, enjoying the peaceful sound of water cascading over limestone ledges. Emma spots something unusual first, a chunk of rock sitting loose on a rocky shelf with what looks like a piece of old wood sticking out from its surface. Max picks up the odd formation. It's about the size of a loaf of bread, heavy and solid. The wood appears to be the remains of some kind of handle, weathered and dark. Neither of them recognizes what it might be, but something about the object intrigues them. They decide to take it home. The rock sits in the Hahn family collection for over a decade. Max occasionally shows it to visitors, but nobody can explain what's inside the limestone nodule. Then in 1946, their son George gets curious enough to take a hammer and chisel to the mysterious rock. He cracks it open carefully, and what he finds inside stops the family cold. It's a hammer, a complete old-fashioned mining hammer with an iron head and wooden handle. But here's the problem. This hammer is completely encased in solid limestone rock. The metal head sits perfectly preserved inside the stone formation, as if the rock grew around it over time. The Hahn family doesn't immediately understand why this discovery might be significant. To them, it's just an interesting curiosity. But when word spreads about their find, researchers start asking difficult questions. How does a modern tool end up completely surrounded by ancient rock? The hammer itself looks completely ordinary. The iron head measures about 6 in long, typical of mining tools used in the late 1800s. The wooden handle shows normal wear patterns. Nothing about the tool's design suggests anything other than a standard 19th century implement. But the rock tells a different story. The limestone nodule that encased the hammer contains fossils and shell fragments typical of formations that are supposedly millions of years old. If the geological dating is correct, this hammer was buried in rock before humans existed on Earth. Researchers examine the discovery site along Red Creek. The area contains limestone formations from the Cretaceous period, supposedly formed between 65 and 135 million years ago. The rock layers show the typical patterns geologists expect from ancient seabeds and marine environments. Carl Bohr, who runs a Cretan science museum in nearby Glen Rose, becomes fascinated with the hammer. He acquires the artifact from the Han family and begins promoting it as evidence that challenges conventional scientific dating methods. According to Bohr, this hammer proves that advanced humans lived alongside dinosaurs millions of years ago. Bohr arranges for metallurgical testing of the hammerhead. The results show it's made of remarkably pure iron, 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and small amounts of sulfur. This composition surprises mythologists because it's purer than most iron produced in the 19th century. The metal shows almost no oxidation or rust despite being buried in rock for an extended period. The wooden handle presents another puzzle. Instead of being completely petrified like you'd expect from wood, millions of years old, it retains much of its original organic structure. Parts of the handle have turned black and coal-like, but other sections still show wood grain and cellular structure. Scientists who examine the hammer focus on understanding how limestone nodules form. Unlike solid rock layers, these concretions develop when mineral-rich water deposits calcium carbonate around objects over time. The process can happen relatively quickly under the right conditions. In limestone-rich environments like the Texas Hill Country, mineral-laden groundwater constantly moves through soil and rock. When this water encounters organic material or metal objects, it can precipitate minerals that gradually build up layers of limestone. The formation process accelerates in areas with high mineral content and specific pH levels. Laboratory experiments show that limestone concretions can form around objects in decades rather than millions of years. The exact conditions depend on water chemistry, temperature, and the composition of surrounding soil. In some cases, concretions develop thick shells in less than 50 years. The Red Creek area where the Han family found the hammer has ideal conditions for rapid concretion formation. The creek flows through limestone bedrock, constantly dissolving and redepositing calcium carbonate. The mineral content in the water is exceptionally high, creating perfect conditions for rapid limestone formation. Historical records show significant mining and construction activity in the London, Texas area during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Mining companies worked limestone quarries and iron ore deposits throughout the region. Tools were frequently lost or abandoned at work sites when projects ended. A detailed examination of the hammer's design and manufacturing, Mark suggests it was made between 1860 and 1890. The style matches tools commonly used in Texas mining operations during that period. The wear patterns indicate it was used for heavy work consistent with quarrying or mining applications. The high iron purity that initially seemed mysterious becomes explainable when researchers consider 19th century iron production methods. Certain smelting techniques, particularly those used for specialized mining tools, could produce very pure iron. The unusual composition might actually confirm the hammer's 19th century origin rather than challenge it. But the most compelling evidence comes from the concretion itself. When scientists analyze the limestone nodule structure, they find it contains modern materials mixed with ancient shell fragments. The nodule isn't a single formation from millions of years ago, but a recent concretion that incorporated older material from the surrounding environment, dropper stones. The mainstream story seems straightforward enough. In 1938, Chinese archaeologist Professor Chi Putaut from Beijing University led an expedition into the remote Byarula Mountains along the China-Tibet border. His team discovered a series of connected caves containing ancient graves arranged in neat rows. Inside these burial chambers, they found the skeletal remains of humanoid beings, measuring only 4 ft tall, along with 716 mysterious stone discs covered in tiny spiral grooves and hieroglyphical-like symbols. According to the official account, these discs measure about 12 in diameter, with a hole in the center resembling ancient phonograph records. Professor Chi Put published his initial findings describing them as artifacts of unknown origin from an isolated mountain people. The discovery generated moderate interest in Chinese archaeological circles before fading into obscurity. 2 decades later, the story took a dramatic turn when Dr. Tsum Nui, reportedly a colleague of Chipe, claimed he had successfully deciphered the tiny hieroglyphs covering the stone discs. His translation revealed an incredible tale of extraterrestrial visitors called the Dropper, who crash-landed on Earth. 12,000 years ago, these beings stranded on our planet were initially feared by local tribes, but eventually integrated into human society. This narrative has captivated researchers and enthusiasts for decades. Books, documentaries, and websites present the Dropper stones as compelling evidence of ancient alien contact. The story includes detailed descriptions of the discs' composition, photographs of the alleged artifacts, and testimonials from various experts who examined them. But here's where the mainstream account starts to crumble under scrutiny. No major museum or archaeological institution has any record of these stones existing. The Chinese Academy of Sciences, which would have overseen such a significant discovery, has no documentation of Qutay's expeditional findings. Beijing University, where Qi Putaut supposedly taught, has no employment records for anyone by that name during the 1930s. Researchers who have attempted to verify the story have hit wall after wall of missing evidence. The caves where the discovery allegedly occurred cannot be located. The Bayan Karula region, while real, shows no archaeological evidence of ancient burial sites matching the description. Local tribes in the area have no oral traditions or knowledge of such discoveries. Even more problematic is the complete absence of the stones themselves. According to various versions of the story, some discs were sent to the Soviet Union for analysis. Others remained in Chinese institutions, and a few ended up in private collections. Yet despite supposedly numbering in the hundreds, not a single verified Dropper stone exists in any museum, university, or research facility worldwide. The photographs commonly associated with the Dropper stones tell their own story. Most show artifacts that are clearly identified as bisques, ceremonial jade objects from ancient China that have holes in their centers. These genuine archaeological artifacts bear no resemblance to the described stone discs covered in hieroglyphs. Other photos show objects that appear to be modern reproductions, or unrelated artifacts misidentified as Dropper stones. Linguistic analysis reveals additional problems. Dr. Tsum Nui, the researcher who allegedly deciphered the hieroglyphs, cannot be verified to have existed. Be natural. Someone or something made this object deliberately. Dr. Adolf Gilt, a mining engineer, studies the cube more closely. His first thought is that it might be meteoritic in origin. Chunks of iron from space sometimes survive their fiery passage through the atmosphere and crash to Earth. But meteoric iron usually contains specific trace elements, particularly nickel, that make it identifiable. The mystery deepens when researchers measure the object precisely. It's 67 mm long, 67 mm wide, and 47 mm thick. The specific gravity measures 7.75, which matches iron, but rules out most other metals. 4 of its 6 sides are roughly flat, while the other 2 sides show more irregular surfaces. What makes this discovery truly puzzling is the coal itself. The lignite seam where Ryle found the cube formed during the Tertiary period, somewhere between 20 and 60 million years ago. At that time, the area was covered by ancient forests. Over millions of years, layers of dead plant material accumulated were buried, compressed, and slowly transformed into coal. The geological evidence seems clear. This coal seam formed long before humans existed, let alone developed the ability to work iron. Yet, here sits what appears to be a manufactured iron object embedded inside coal that supposedly predates human civilization by tens of millions of years. Scientists examine the object using increasingly sophisticated methods as technology advances. In the 1960s, electron beam microanalysis reveals something unexpected. The iron shows no traces of nickel, chromium, or cobalt. These elements are typically found in meteoritic iron, which rules out the space origin theory. The analysis also shows unusually low magnesium content, leading researchers to conclude the object might be cast iron rather than meteoric iron. Cast iron is definitely human-made, but that explanation creates an even bigger problem. How does human-made cast iron end up inside coal that formed millions of years before humans existed? By 1973, researcher Hubert Matliner conducts more detailed studies. His analysis suggests the object was created using the Essey-Purdue technique, also known as lost wax casting. This is an ancient method where a wax model is covered in clay. The wax is melted out and molten metal is poured into the resulting mold. The lost wax technique has been used by humans for thousands of years to create complex metal objects, but finding evidence of this manufacturing method in an object supposedly millions of years old creates a logical impossibility. Meanwhile, other researchers focus on the cold seam itself. They study the geological formation, the layers above and below the chemical composition of the surrounding rock. Everything confirms that this lignite formed during the Tertiary period through natural processes that took place over vast spans of time. Some investigators propose alternative explanations. Perhaps the object fell into a crack in the earth and became embedded in the coal through geological processes that mixed different time periods. Maybe groundwater dissolved and redeposited iron in an unusual pattern that only looks artificial. Others suggest the object might be much younger than the coal. Industrial activities in the 19th century involved all kinds of metal objects. Foundry equipment, tools and machinery parts were made from cast iron. If such an object had somehow been forced into a coal seam during mining operations, it might appear to be embedded in ancient rock, when it was actually much more recent. The physical evidence presents contradictory clues. Photographs of the object show it's not actually a perfect cube as often described. The surface is pitted and irregular, more like corroded metal than precisely machined parts. The famous groove around its middle could be natural corrosion rather than deliberate. Chemical analysis reveals the iron composition matches industrial cast iron from the 19th century rather than ancient metallurgy. The manufacturing techniques available in 1885 could easily have produced an object with these exact properties. But the foundry workers insist they broke the object directly out of solid coal. They maintain the lignite showed no signs of being disturbed or artificially embedded. The coal cracked open cleanly, revealing the metal object sitting inside as if it had been there for millions of years. Sanjon de la Chocbol. The pickaxe hit something wrong. That's the first sign. When you've spent months breaking through chalk deposits, you know the sound of metal on stone. This sound is different. It's hollow, almost like tapping on metal. The year is 1968, and workers at the Sanjon d'Eve quarry in Calvados, France, are digging deep into ancient chalk beds. This isn't soft modern chalk. This is Aptian chalk, formed during the Cretaceous period, roughly 125 million years ago. Back when dinosaurs ruled the earth and flowering plants first appeared. The foreman stops the work. Something metallic is embedded in the chalk wall, something that gleams reddish-brown in the quarry lights. As they carefully extract it, more objects appear. Small egg-shaped pieces of metal. Some are barely an inch long, others stretch to nearly 4 in. All of them have the same strange semi-oval shape. Why? Drew and H. Salati, 2 French speleologists working in the region, arrived to examine the find. Speleologists spend their lives studying caves and underground formations. They know rocks, minerals, and geological processes better than most. When they see these metallic nodules embedded in solid chalk, they immediately recognize something impossible. The objects aren't random chunks of metal. They're too uniform, too deliberately shaped. Each one has a hollow center and smooth curved walls. The metal composition appears artificial, not like anything formed by natural geological processes. But here they are, locked inside chalk that hasn't seen daylight for over 100 million years. Druit and Salati document everything carefully. They measure each object. The smallest is about 10 millimeter wide. The largest reaches 40 millimeters. The lengths vary from 30 to 90 millimeter. The shapes are consistent, semi-ovoid, like metal eggs cut in half lengthwise. The surfaces show no signs of recent manufacture. They're weathered, corroded, ancient-looking. The chalk itself tells a story. Aptian chalk forms from the compressed remains of marine organisms that lived in ancient seas. Over millions of years, pressure and chemical processes turn these organic sediments into solid rock. For metal objects to be embedded in this chalk, they would have had to be present when the sediments were first deposited. That places them in the middle of the Cretaceous period. But humans didn't exist 125 million years ago. Neither did any animals capable of metal work. The first primitive mammals were tiny shrew-like creatures. Dinosaurs dominated the land. The oceans teemed with ammonites and marine reptiles. Nothing on Earth had the intelligence or technology to create artificial metal objects. The discovery reaches the scientific community. Experts examine photographs and descriptions of the metallic nodules. Some suggest they might be natural formations, unusual mineral concretions that coincidentally resemble artificial objects. Others point out that metal doesn't form naturally in the shapes and configurations found at Sanjan Deli. The Geomorphology Laboratory at the University Dar agrees to study the objects. This gives the discovery credibility. University laboratories have the equipment and expertise to determine the exact composition and age of the metallic nodules. They can perform isotope analysis, study the crystal structure, and compare the metal to known natural formations. But then something strange happens. The study disappears into bureaucratic limbo. Months pass without results. Researchers who try to contact the laboratory about the Sanjon Dev objects receive no response. The nodules seem to have vanished into the university's archives. Meanwhile, word spreads about the discovery. The story appears in geological journals and archaeological publications. Each retelling adds new details or slightly changes existing ones. Some accounts describe the objects as tubes, others call them spheres or nodules. The numbers vary. The exact location in the quarry becomes unclear. Critics examine the evidence available. They note that the only documentation comes from the original discoverer's reports. No independent verification exists. The promised scientific analysis from the University of Car never materializes. Without proper study, it's impossible to determine whether the objects are genuinely ancient or contamination from modern sources. The Sanjon Dev quarry operated as a commercial enterprise. Heavy machinery, metal tools, and industrial equipment worked the site daily. Over decades of operation, metal debris could accumulate. Broken parts, worn equipment, discarded materials, all might find their way into the excavation areas. Chalk formations aren't always as solid as they appear. Water can create channels and cavities in limestone and chalk deposits. Modern objects can work their way into these spaces, becoming embedded in what looks like undisturbed ancient rock. The weathered appearance of the metallic nodules doesn't necessarily indicate great age. Exposure to acidic groundwater and chemical processes in chalk deposits can corrode metal quickly. Geological surveys of the region reveal extensive mining and quarrying activity dating back centuries. Roman builders extracted stone from similar deposits. Medieval masons worked the area. Industrial operations began in the 1800s. Each generation of workers left behind tools, equipment, and metal objects. The chalk beds themselves show signs of disturbance. Natural processes like freeze-thaw cycles, root action, and groundwater movement can shift and redeposit materials within rock formations. What appears to be an undisturbed ancient layer might actually be a mixed zone where old and new materials combine. Some researchers focus on the object's uniform appearance. If these were random pieces of industrial debris, wouldn't they show more variation in shape, size, and condition? The semi-ovoid form appears too consistent to be accidental contamination. Malikitman. In a world where most archaeological discoveries follow predictable patterns, some finds emerge that force us to question everything we think we know about the past. Deep beneath the Utah desert, in layers of rock that formed when dinosaurs ruled the earth, a discovery was made that would challenge the very foundations of human history. This is not a story about ancient civilizations or forgotten cultures. This is about modern human beings found where they should not exist. The year was 1971, and the American Southwest was experiencing a boom in amateur rock collecting and mineral hunting. Lynn Oettinger, a local tour guide and rock shop owner from Moab, Utah, had built a reputation for knowing the best spots to find unusual specimens. On a warm spring day in May, he was leading a small group of enthusiasts to the Keystone Azurite mine, formerly known as the Big Indian Copper Mine, located about 15 miles south of Moab near the Colorado River. The mine had been worked intermittently for decades, primarily for copper and other minerals. What made this particular location interesting to rock hounds was its rich deposits of azurite and malachite, the brilliant blue and green copper minerals that collectors prized. But as Oettinger and his group explored the workings, they encountered something far more extraordinary than colorful minerals. Approximately 58 ft down, in the Dakota Sandstone Formation, Oettinger spotted what appeared to be bone fragments. The Dakota Sandstone is well known to geologists as a lower Cretaceous formation dating back roughly 100 to 140 million years. This was the age of dinosaurs, when massive reptiles dominated the landscape and the first small mammals were just beginning to appear. No human should exist in rock this old. As Oettinger carefully examined the find, the scope of the discovery became apparent. These were not isolated bone fragments. What emerged from the sandstone were the remains of what appeared to be modern human beings. The bones had taken on a distinctive bright green coloration from the copper minerals in the surrounding rock, particularly malachite, which gave the discovery its name. Over the following months, as word spread through both amateur and professional circles, additional remains were uncovered. By some accounts, skeletal remains of up to 10 individuals were eventually recovered from the site. The bones were anatomically modern human remains, showing no primitive characteristics that might suggest they belonged to an earlier human ancestor. They appeared in every measurable way to be contemporary with modern humans. The implications were staggering. If these bones were truly embedded in a 140-million-year-old Cretaceous sandstone, they would predate the accepted emergence of mammals by tens of millions of years. They would place modern humans alongside Tyrannosaurus rex and Triceratops. They would fundamentally overturn everything science understands about evolution and the timeline of life on Earth. News of the discovery reached Clifford Burdick, a geologist and creation researcher who had spent years searching for evidence that might support alternative views of Earth's history. In 1973, Burdick published his analysis of the find, arguing that the bones were indeed embedded in the ancient sandstone formation and represented proof that humans and dinosaurs had coexisted. But the scientific establishment was not convinced. Mainstream geologists and paleontologists who examined the site raised serious questions about the discovery. They pointed out that the area had been disturbed by mining activities for decades. The bones, they argued, were found in what appeared to be loose, unconsolidated sand rather than solid rock. The green coloration, while striking, could occur relatively quickly under the right chemical conditions. Critical analysis of the site revealed additional problems with the extraordinary claims. The human remains were found in what appeared to be a natural cave or fissure in the rock, not embedded within the solid sandstone matrix itself. This suggested that the bones had been deposited in the cave much more recently and had acquired their mineral coloration through contact with copper-rich groundwater. Furthermore, when professional archaeologists examined the site, they found evidence of more recent human activity. Native American artifacts were discovered in the same general area, suggesting that the caves and fissures in the rock formation had been used by people within the last few thousand years, not millions of years ago. The controversy deepened when attempts were made to radiocarbon date the bones. While some claimed that the mineral replacement made accurate dating impossible, others suggested that the bones were far too recent to be of Cretaceous age. The debate became entangled in larger discussions about the age of the Earth and the validity of evolutionary theory. As investigations continued into the 1980s and 1990s, the weight of evidence increasingly suggested that Malachite Man represented a case of recent human remains that had become mineralized in an ancient rock formation. The copper-rich environment of the mine had created the perfect conditions for bones to acquire the distinctive green coloration that made them appear ancient. Yet questions remained. How exactly had the bones become so thoroughly mineralized? Why were they found so deep in the formation? Even if the remains were recent, the mechanism by which they had ended up in their final location was not entirely clear. King Goody artifact. Sometimes the most obvious explanation is the hardest one to accept. When quarry workers at Millfield near King's Scotland split open a block of sandstone in 1844, they expected to find nothing but ancient rock. Instead, they discovered something that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about the past. An iron nail, corroded but unmistakable, lay embedded within stone that geologists dated to millions of years before humans supposedly learned to work metal. The establishment wants you to believe their timeline. They insist that human civilization began roughly 10,000 years ago, that ironworking emerged around 3,000 years ago, and that before these recent developments, our ancestors lived as primitive hunter-gatherers. But what happens when physical evidence directly contradicts their carefully constructed narrative? The King Udi artifact represents exactly this kind of inconvenient truth. Sir David Brewster, a respected Scottish physicist and founder of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, examined the nail personally. This wasn't some amateur treasure hunter making wild claims. Brewster had built his reputation on careful observation and scientific rigor. When he reported his findings to the British Association, he described a cut iron nail about the size of a six-penny nail, slightly corroded, found within Dionian Old Red Sandstone Formation, estimated to be 360 to 400 million years old. The quarry workers who made the discovery weren't looking for anything unusual. They were simply extracting building stone when their tools split the sandstone block. The nail didn't fall out or appear loosely placed. According to their account, it was firmly embedded within the stone itself with about half an inch projecting into the overlying clay. The iron showed clear signs of oxidation and age, but remained recognizably manufactured rather than naturally formed. Geologists immediately began questioning the age of the rock formation. The Old Red Sandstone at King Goody had been classified as Dionian period, formed during an era when the most complex life forms were primitive fish and early amphibians. No mammals existed, no reptiles had evolved. The idea of human beings, let alone human technology, existing during this period contradicted every established principle of evolutionary timeline. But Brewster didn't back down from his observations. He submitted detailed queries and statements to his scientific peers, asking them to explain how a manufactured iron nail could exist within such ancient rock. The responses he received focused on questioning the nail's origin rather than explaining its presence. Some suggested the nail might have been dropped during excavation and somehow became embedded through natural processes. Others proposed that the rock might not be as old as initially determined. The skeptical explanations revealed more about scientific bias than scientific method. Rather than investigating how human technology might have existed far earlier than believed, researchers immediately assumed the evidence must be wrong. They preferred to question clear physical observations rather than reconsider their theoretical assumptions about human history. Modern analysis of similar discoveries has revealed that rapid mineralization can occur under specific conditions. Certain geological environments can encapsulate metal objects within forming stone in remarkably short timeframes. However, the King Ui site showed no evidence of recent geological activity that could explain such rapid stone formation around a modern nail. The nail itself displayed characteristics inconsistent with 19th century manufacturing. The iron composition and forging mark suggested techniques that didn't match contemporary Scottish metalwork practices. Chemical analysis would have provided crucial information about the metal's age and origin, but such testing wasn't performed at the time of discovery. Archaeological evidence from around the world increasingly suggests that human technological. His name follows Japanese naming conventions rather than Chinese ones, and no academic records support his supposed credentials or research. The hieroglyphic system he described doesn't match any known ancient writing systems from the Tibet-China region. The timeline itself raises questions. In 1938, China was embroiled in the Second Sino-Japanese War. Remote archaeological expeditions requiring significant resources and personnel would have been extremely difficult to organize and fund. The logistics of mounting such an expedition during wartime, then maintaining detailed records and conducting extensive analysis, seem highly improbable given the historical context. Independent investigators have traced the story's origins to European and American writers rather than Chinese sources. The earliest detailed accounts appear in Western publications from the 1960s and 1970s, written by authors with no apparent connection to Chinese archaeological institutions. These writers embellished and expanded the basic story with each retelling, adding new details and dramatic elements that don't appear in any purported original Chinese sources. The scientific claims surrounding the stones also don't withstand examination. Descriptions of their composition vary wildly between different accounts. Some claim they're made of granite, others say they contain unusual metals, and still others describe them as being made of materials unknown to modern science. No consistent physical description exists because there are no actual stones to examine. Geological analysis of the Bayan Karula region shows rock formations that would make the described cave systems unlikely. The area's limestone and sandstone composition doesn't support large, stable cave network suitable for ancient burial. Chambers. Archaeological surveys of similar regions have found no evidence of the advanced stonework techniques that would be required to create such precisely carved discs. The cultural context also doesn't support the story. The supposed Dropper and Ham tribes mentioned in the translations don't correspond to any known ethnic groups from the region. Anthropological studies of Tibet-China border peoples show no oral traditions. Genetic markers or cultural practices that would support contact with extraterrestrial visitors or the existence of unusually small humanoid populations. Koso artifact. Business is slow at the Desert Rock Shop near Alanch, California. So Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike McKeel decide to spend February 13, 1961, hunting for interesting rocks to sell. They're experienced rock hounds who know the Koso Mountains well, searching for geodes and other mineral specimens that tourists might buy. The three partners drive into the hills east of Alanch, looking for promising rock formations. About 4,300 ft up in the mountains, Lane spots what looks like a typical geode sitting loose on the ground. The rock appears unremarkable, roughly 6 in diameter, covered with the usual crusty exterior that geodes develop over time. But something about its weight catches his attention. This supposed geode feels heavier than expected, suggesting it might contain unusual crystals or mineral formations inside. The three collectors gather several rocks during their expedition and head back to their shop. The mysterious heavy geode sits with their other finds, waiting to be processed. The next day, Mel takes the rock to his workshop to cut it open with his diamond saw. This is routine work for experienced rockhounds. Slice open the geode, reveal the crystal interior, and determine its commercial value. But when Mixel's saw blade hits the rock, something goes wrong. The blade dulls immediately, struggling against unexpected resistance inside what should be a hollow geode. After considerable effort, he manages to cut through the outer layer, and what he finds inside stops him cold. Instead of crystals or an empty cavity, the geode contains a perfectly cylindrical object made of white porcelain-like material. In the center of this white cylinder sits a metallic shaft, exactly like the electrode in a spark plug. The object measures about 3/4 of an inch in diameter and appears to be a complete manufactured component. Mike calls his partners over to examine the discovery. None of them can explain how a mechanical device ended up inside what appeared to be a natural geode. The white ceramic material looks like electrical insulation, and the metal shaft shows the kind of precision manufacturing associated with automotive or industrial equipment. The three rockhounds know enough about geology to understand why this discovery seems impossible. Geodesics form over thousands or millions of years as mineral-rich water deposits crystals inside hollow cavities in rock. The process happens slowly in natural environments, undisturbed by human activity. Finding manufactured objects inside genuine geodesics would challenge everything geologists know about rock formation. Word of the discovery spreads through local rock collecting circles. Someone contacts a radiologist who agrees to X-ray the object to better understand its internal structure. The X-ray images reveal even more detail. The artifact shows clear signs of mechanical construction, with internal components arranged exactly like those in a spark plug. The mystery deepens when the discoverers learn about the geological age of rocks in the Coso mountain area. According to standard geological dating, the rock formations where they found the geode are extremely old, possibly 500,000 years or more. If their geode formed naturally in this environment, the spark plug-like object inside would predate human civilization by hundreds of thousands of years. This apparent impossibility attracts attention from researchers interested in anomalous artifacts. The object becomes known as the Coso artifact and gains a reputation as evidence that advanced technology existed in prehistoric times. Some theorists suggest it proves ancient civilizations possessed sophisticated manufacturing capabilities. Others propose it indicates extraterrestrial visitation in the distant past. But experienced investigators know that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. They begin examining the discovery more carefully, looking for simpler explanations that might account for the apparent paradox. The first line of investigation focuses on the object itself. Detailed examination reveals it's not just similar to a spark plug. It appears to be an actual spark plug, complete with the porcelain insulator, metal electrode, and threaded exterior typical of early 20th century automotive components. The construction matches spark plugs manufactured in the 1920s, specifically Champion brand plugs used in Ford Model T engines. But if this is a genuine 1920s spark plug, how did it end up encased in what appears to be ancient rock? The answer requires understanding the difference between geodesics and concretions, two geological formations that can look similar but form through different processes. True geodesics develop slowly over millions of years in volcanic or sedimentary environments, but concretions can form much more rapidly when mineral-rich water encounters foreign objects. In the right conditions, concretions can develop thick, rock-like shells around buried items in just decades or centuries rather than geological ages. The Coso Mountains have a history of mining activity dating back to the late 1800s and early 1900s. Mines in the area extracted gold, silver, and other minerals using equipment that included gasoline-powered machinery. Mining operations frequently discarded broken or worn-out equipment at work sites, especially when projects ended or companies went out of business. Chemical analysis of the supposed geode reveals it's actually a concretion, a mass of mineral matter that formed around the spark plug after it was discarded. The mineral composition matches what geologists expect from rapid concretion formation in the local groundwater environment, not the slow crystal growth typical of genuine geodesics. The timeline fits perfectly with the mining history of the area. Gasoline-powered equipment became common in California mining operations during the 1920s. When machinery broke down or wore out, components like spark plugs were often left at remote work sites rather than transported back to town for proper disposal. Wolfsigion. Inside a foundry in Austria, the air is thick with coal dust and the sound of hammers on metal. It's 1885 and the Industrial Revolution has reached every corner of Europe. Workers at Isidor Brown's foundry near Wolfsigion Hausuck go through their daily routine. Break open blocks of brown coal, feed the furnaces, keep the fires burning hot enough to melt iron. But on this particular autumn day, something unusual happens. A worker named Ryle swings his hammer down on a block of lignite coal, splitting it open like he's done thousands of times before. The coal cracks apart cleanly. Inside, where there should be nothing but more coal, sits a small metal object. It's roughly cube-shaped, about the size of a matchbox, but heavier, much heavier. The metal surface looks weathered, almost corroded, with a deep groove running around its middle like someone had carved it there on purpose. The worker holds it up to the light, turns it over in his hands. The object weighs nearly 2 it will be, despite its small size. Word spreads quickly through the foundry. Other workers gather around to examine this strange find. They've broken open thousands of coal blocks over the years, but never found anything like this inside. The coal itself is old, part of a seam that formed deep underground millions of years ago, long before humans walked the earth. Ron's son, intrigued by the discovery, takes the object to the local museum in Fauluk. The curators there examine it carefully. The metal appears to be iron, but its shape is too regular to... Miners through narrow tunnels carved into pyrrolite deposits near the small town of Clarksdorp. Your boots crunch on loose stone as you make your way deeper underground, completely unaware that you're walking through geological layers that formed when Earth was barely recognizable as the planet we know today. Then your light catches something that shouldn't exist. Scattered throughout the ancient rock are perfect spheres, some with mysterious grooves running around their circumference like seams on a cricket ball. They're sitting in stone that's older than complex life itself, yet they look for all the world like manufactured objects. This is how the mystery of the Clarksdorfiers began. Not with dramatic announcements or scientific expeditions, but with ordinary miners doing their jobs in extraordinary geological conditions. Let me tell you the part of this story that everyone gets wrong. The conventional narrative starts with these mysterious claims about artificial objects, but the real detective work begins with understanding what everyone thought they knew about these spheres and how those assumptions shaped decades of debate. Roe Marks, curator of the Clarksdorp Museum, became the face of this mystery in the 1980s when his comments about the spheres appeared in various publications. According to widespread reports, Marks described the spheres as being perfectly round, harder than steel, and even capable of rotating on their own inside museum display cases. These claims spread like wildfire through alternative archaeology circles, with each retelling adding new dramatic details. But here's where the detective story takes its first twist. Marks later stated that he'd been missed and that his words had been taken out of context. The claims about hardness, perfect sphericity, and mysterious rotation weren't accurate representations of what he had observed. Yet by then, the legend had already taken root in popular consciousness. The spheres themselves present a fascinating puzzle that requires understanding their geological context. They're found in pyrrolite deposits that formed during the Araneon between 2.8 and 3.1 billion years ago. During this time, Earth's atmosphere contained almost no oxygen. The continents were smaller and constantly shifting, and life consisted of simple, single-celled organisms. Complex life forms wouldn't appear for another 2 billion years. Pyrrolite is a soft mineral that forms from volcanic ash and sediments under specific temperature and pressure conditions. The deposits near Clarksdorp accumulated in ancient volcanic environments, creating layers of this aluminum silicate mineral that would eventually become economically valuable for industrial purposes. When miners began extracting pyrite from these ancient deposits, they discovered spherical objects embedded within the rock layers. The spheres range in size from tiny marble-like objects to specimens several inches in diameter. Many display parallel grooves or ridges running around their circumference, creating the appearance of artificial construction. The first scientific investigation of these objects was conducted by Nell and others in 1937. Though their work received little attention outside geological circles, they identified the spheres as natural concretions, rounded masses of mineral matter formed by precipitation from groundwater within sedimentary rock layers. But the mystery deepened when later researchers examined the spheres more closely. Some specimens appeared remarkably spherical with precise grooves that seemed too regular to be natural formations. The internal structure showed concentric layers, suggesting they had formed through repeated cycles of mineral deposition over vast periods of time. Chemical analysis revealed that the spheres are composed primarily of hematite, pyrite, and wollastonite, all minerals that can form naturally through geological processes. The hematite spheres, in particular, showed evidence of being pseudomorphs, minerals that have replaced other minerals while retaining the original crystal structure. This finding provided crucial evidence about how the spheres formed. Originally, they were likely pyrite concretions that developed within the pyrrolite deposits. Over millions of years, groundwater carrying dissolved iron oxidized these pyrite nodules, transforming them into hematite while preserving their spherical shape and internal structure. The grooves that make some spheres appear artificially manufactured actually result from the natural process of concretion formation. As minerals precipitate from groundwater, they often create layered structures with varying hardness. Weathering and erosion then exploit these differences, creating the parallel ridges and grooves that seem so mysterious. Testing the hardness claims revealed another important fact. Contrary to popular reports, the spheres are not harder than steel. They measure between 4.0 and 5.0 on the MO hardness scale, making them softer than quartz, and about the same hardness as fluorite or apatite. This is consistent with their mineral composition and natural formation. The claim about self-rotation proved equally unfounded. Marx explained that any apparent movement of spheres in museum displays resulted from vibrations caused by underground blasting in nearby gold mines. The Witwaters's round gold mining region, where Clark is located, experiences regular underground explosions that can cause subtle movements in delicately balanced objects. Recent detailed studies have identified the specific geological processes responsible for creating these spheres. They formed as concretions in volcanic ash and sediment layers, with their spherical shape resulting from the uniform precipitation of minerals from groundwater. The groove patterns developed as different mineral layers weathered at different rates over geological time. Geologists have found similar concretions in many other locations worldwide formed under comparable conditions. The Moaki boulders in New Zealand, the Cannonball concretions in North Dakota, and similar formations in Utah all demonstrate that spherical concretions with regular patterns are common geological phenomena. What makes the Clark's-Dorp spheres unique is not their artificial appearance, but their extraordinary age. At 3 billion years old, they represent some of the oldest spherical concretions on Earth, formed during a period when our planet was fundamentally different from today. They provide valuable insights into ancient volcanic environments and early geological processes. The debate over these spheres reveals how easily natural phenomena can be misinterpreted when viewed through the lens of preconceived expectations. The same grooves and spherical shapes that seem to suggest artificial manufacture actually provide clear evidence of natural concretion formation processes. Modern examination techniques have confirmed that the Clark's-Dorp spheres show no tool marks, artificial materials, or other evidence of manufacturing. Their mineral composition, internal structure, and formation patterns all match what geologists would expect from natural concretions formed in ancient volcanic environments. Yet the mystery persists in popular culture, demonstrating how initial misunderstandings can become entrenched beliefs that resist correction. The Clark's Dorp spheres continue to appear in lists of unexplained archaeological anomalies despite extensive scientific analysis that explains their formation through well-understood natural processes. The true story of these spheres offers something more valuable than mystery, a window into Earth's ancient past and the remarkable geological processes that can create objects of stunning regularity and beauty over billions of years. So there you have it. 27 discoveries that mainstream archaeology won't touch. From the Kensington Runstone to the Clark's Dorp spheres, each find raises the same uncomfortable question. What if our timeline is completely wrong? The past isn't what they taught you in school. It's time to dig deeper. Overlooked artifacts from previous human activity in the area that somehow got mixed in with the blasted rock. The location itself added complexity to the investigation. Meeting House Hill had been a site of human activity for generations. Native American populations had lived in the area long before European settlement. Colonial-era activities might have left artifacts that could explain the discovery. In 1964, Italian researcher Bio Catalano proposed a more mundane explanation. He argued that the vessel closely resembled Victorian-era pipe holders, particularly one he had observed at the Prince of Wales Museum in Bombay. This identification suggested that the Dorchester pot might be nothing more than a 19th century household object that had somehow become embedded in the construction debris. Other researchers expanded on this theory, suggesting the vessel could be a candlestick holder or some other common Victorian decorative item. The ornate silver inlay work and overall design certainly fit the aesthetic preferences of mid-9th century craftsmanship, but these explanations faced their own problems. How would such an object become embedded 15 ft deep in solid pudding stone? The rock showed no obvious signs of recent disturbance or fissures that could allow surface objects to migrate to such depths. The blast pattern and debris field suggested that the pieces had indeed come from deep within the solid rock formation. The question of the vessel's condition also puzzled investigators. If it had been exposed to surface conditions for any significant period, wouldn't it show different patterns of corrosion or weathering? The metal appeared to have characteristics consistent with long burial in the specific mineral environment of the Roxbury conglomerate. Metallurgical analysis might have resolved some questions, but the technology for detailed compositional analysis didn't exist in 1851. Later, researchers would have to rely on descriptions and photographs as the original artifact's location became uncertain over time. The discovery sparked broader questions about how scientists evaluate anomalous finds. What standards of evidence should apply when a discovery challenges fundamental assumptions? How do researchers distinguish between genuine anomalies and misinterpreted data? The case remained open, with evidence pointing in multiple directions and no clear resolution emerging from the available facts. The Dorchester pot continued to represent one of Archae's most puzzling mysteries, where conventional explanations seemed inadequate, but extraordinary claims lacked definitive proof. Baghdad Battery. Think of armament when everything you thought you knew about the past gets turned upside down. You're dusting off shelves in the National Museum of Iraq in 1938, carefully cataloguing artifacts that have been sitting in storage since their discovery near Baghdad 2 years earlier. Your name is Wilhelm Koig, and you're the museum director with a background in both archaeology and science. As you examine one particular ceramic jar from the ancient site of Kujut Rao, something doesn't add up. The vessel contains a copper cylinder sealed with asphalt, and inside that cylinder sits an iron rod. The construction is too deliberate, too purposeful to be random. Then it hits you like lightning. You might be holding a 2,000-year-old battery. The artifact before Koig came from the ruins near Ctesiphon, once the mighty capital of both the Parthian and Sasanian empires. The bright yellow clay vessel stands about 6 in tall, unremarkable at first glance, among thousands of pottery fragments found throughout Mesopotamia. But this jar contains something extraordinary, a copper tube, roughly 5 in long, held in place by a thick layer of bitumen. Threading through the center of this copper cylinder runs an iron rod, creating what appears to be a primitive electrical cell. The ceramic style suggests it dates to the Caesanian period, somewhere between 224 and 650 AD, making it potentially the world's oldest known battery. Koig's theory sparked immediate controversy. How could ancient peoples have understood electrical principles that wouldn't be formally discovered until Alejandro Valter's experiments in 1800? The very suggestion challenged everything historians believed about technological development in the ancient world. Yet the physical evidence was undeniable. The Baghdad battery contained all the essential components of a galvanic cell. Two different metals separated by an electrolyte medium. The discovery wasn't entirely isolated. 4 similar vessels had been excavated at nearby Seleucia in 1930, each sealed with bitumen and containing bronze cylinders. Inside these cylinders, archaeologists found rolled papyrus containing decomposed organic material, suggesting these containers might have served multiple purposes. The pattern indicated that such constructions weren't accidental, but represented a deliberate technology understood by ancient craftspeople. Testing Koig's hypothesis required careful experimentation. In 1939, an electrical engineer at General Electric's Pittsfield plant constructed a working replica of the Baghdad battery. Using copper sulfate solution as an electrolyte, the device generated approximately half a volt of electricity and maintained current for short periods. Later experiments using grape juice as the electrolyte, a substance readily available to ancient peoples, produced similar results. The reconstructions proved that the artifact could indeed function as a primitive battery. But what would ancient peoples have used electricity for? Koig proposed 2 main possibilities: electroplating and medical therapy. Evidence from other archaeological sites suggests that ancient metal myths possess sophisticated techniques for applying thin layers of one metal onto another. Electrical current could have enhanced these processes, allowing craftspeople to create more durable and attractive finishes on jewelry and ceremonial objects. Ancient medical texts also describe various shock treatments for ailments, suggesting that controlled electrical stimulation might have been used therapeutically. The electroplating theory gained support when researchers examined ancient artifacts with unusually thin, even metal coatings that would be difficult to achieve through traditional fire-based methods. Some Mesopotamian artifacts display gold and silver plating so fine and uniform that modern techniques struggle to replicate the results. Could ancient artisans have used electrical current to achieve these remarkable finishes? The possibility challenged assumptions about technological capabilities in the pre-industrial world. However, skeptics raised important questions about the battery theory. No electrical wires or connection devices have been found at archaeological sites, and the copper cylinders show no evidence of the chemical residues that would accumulate from regular electrical use. The presence of organic material inside the vessels suggests they might have served ritual or storage purposes rather than electrical functions. Some archaeologists argue that the objects were simply containers for magical scrolls or incantation materials common throughout ancient Mesopotamia. The debate intensified when researchers discovered that the Baghdad battery's construction closely matched descriptions of ritual vessels used in ancient magic practices. The combination of different metals, organic materials, and sealed containers appears frequently in texts describing protective spells and curse rituals. The copper and iron components might have held symbolic rather than functional significance, representing different divine or elemental forces in ancient belief systems. Modern analysis revealed additional complexities in the artifact's composition. The copper cylinder contains trace elements consistent with ancient smelting techniques, while the iron rod shows patterns of corrosion, suggesting long-term exposure to acidic substances. These findings could support either interpretation. The acid might have been an electrolyte for electrical function, or it could represent decomposed organic ritual materials. Recent experiments have produced mixed results regarding the Baghdad battery's electrical capabilities. While replicas can generate small amounts of current under laboratory conditions, Sustaining that current requires constant maintenance and replacement of electrolyte solutions. The practical challenges of operating such devices in ancient times raise questions about their feasibility as everyday tools. Would ancient peoples have possessed the knowledge and resources to maintain working electrical devices? The mystery deepened when researchers realized that similar artifacts have been found throughout the ancient world, from Egypt to Central Asia. These discoveries suggest either that electrical knowledge was more widespread than previously believed, or that the objects served common non-electrical purposes across different cultures. The geographic distribution of these artifacts follows ancient trade routes, indicating that the technology, whatever its true function, spread through established commercial networks. Archaeological context provides crucial clues about the Baghdad battery's actual use. The artifact was found in a residential area rather than a workshop or temple, suggesting it belonged to ordinary citizens rather than specialized craftspeople or priests. This location argues against both the electroplating and ritual magic theories, pointing towards more mundane applications. Perhaps these devices served as storage containers, preservation systems, or even early forms of scientific instruments, the mysterious spheres of Clark's. Hold your breath. You're about to descend into one of South Africa's deepest mines, where the darkness swallows your headlamp beam and the weight of 3 billion years of rock presses down from above. The year is 1979 and you're following. By 1886, Bubbin had expanded his operations to New York, where his auction catalogue advertised another crystal skull described as originating from the Valley of Mexico. The catalogue also listed a crystal hand, supposedly Aztec in origin. These objects, like many others in Bulbin's inventory, seem to appear from nowhere with no documentation of their discovery or archaeological context. The most famous crystal skull discovery came in 1924 when 17-year-old Anna Mitchell Hedges claimed to have found a perfect specimen beneath a collapsed altar at the Maya ruins of Lupantoon in British Honduras, now Bisse. Her adoptive father, adventurer Frederick Mitchell Hedges, was leading an archaeological expedition to the site when Anna allegedly made her remarkable discovery on her birthday. The Mitchell Hedges skull was unlike anything seen before. Carved from a single block of clear quartz crystal, it featured a detachable jaw and showed incredibly sophisticated workmanship. The skull's surface was so perfectly polished that it seemed to glow within a light. Mitchell Hedges himself described it as the skull of doom, claiming it was carved by Maya craftsmen thousands of years ago. Yet, even as Anna Mitchell Hedges told her story, questions emerged. No photographs documented the skull's discovery. No other team members recalled seeing Anna find the artifact. Most troubling of all, researchers later discovered that the skull had appeared in London auction houses years before the alleged Lubanton discovery, offered for sale by none other than Frederick Mitchell Hedges himself. The 1930s and 1940s saw more crystal skulls surface in private collections and smaller museums. Each came with tantalizing stories of ancient Mer or Aztec origins, but none had verifiable archaeological documentation. Collectors and dealers passed these objects from hand to hand, their supposed histories growing more elaborate with each telling. In 1992, the mystery deepened when the Smithsonian Institution received an anonymous package containing a massive crystal skull weighing 31 lebi. The accompanying letter suggested it was of Aztec origin, but provided no other information about its history or discovery. Smithsonian anthropologist Jane McLaren Walsh began investigating the skull's origins, a quest that would eventually expose the truth behind these enigmatic artifacts. Walsh's research led her to examine crystal skulls in collections around the world. Working with British Museum scientist Margaret Sachs, she subjected several skulls to detailed analysis using scanning electron microscopes and other advanced techniques. What they discovered revolutionized our understanding of these mysterious objects. The microscopic evidence was damning. Tool marks on the skull's surfaces showed they had been carved using rotary wheels and modern polishing compounds available only since the 19th century. Pre-Cullian craftsmen had no access to such technology. They worked jade, obsidian, and other materials using hand tools and abrasive sands, techniques that would have left entirely different microscopic signatures. Further investigation revealed that virtually every crystal skull in museum collections could be traced back to the same source. Eugene Baban and his network of dealers operating in the late 1800s. The British Museum's skull, the Paris specimens, even the massive Smithsonian skull, all showed evidence of being carved by European craftsmen using 19th or early 20th century techniques. The revelation sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Prestigious institutions like the British Museum began displaying their crystal skulls with new labels identifying them as modern fakes. The Smithsonian likewise acknowledged that their specimen was not an ancient artifact, but a skillful 20th century creation. Even the famous Mitchell Hedges skull, long considered the most convincing of all crystal skulls, showed clear evidence of modern manufacturing. Experts determined it was likely carved in Europe, possibly by the same workshops that produced other specimens in Bobbin's network. The Skull of Doom was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. Today, researchers estimate that dozens of crystal skulls exist in private collections and smaller museums worldwide. Some owners continue to believe in their ancient origins despite overwhelming scientific evidence to the contrary. New skulls still appear regularly, often claimed to come from Tibet, Brazil, or other exotic locations. But analysis consistently reveals them to be modern creations made from glass, resin, or recently carved crystal. The crystal skull phenomenon reveals fascinating insights into how archaeological hoaxes develop and spread. Bobbin and his contemporaries understood that 19th century collectors craved tangible connections to mysterious ancient civilizations by creating objects that seemed to fulfill those desires. They tapped into powerful cultural fantasies about lost wisdom and forgotten technologies. The skull's enduring appeal lies partly in their technical perfection. Unlike crude fakes, these objects were created by skilled craftsmen who understood both human anatomy and crystal carving techniques. Their creators invested significant time and money to produce convincing artifacts that would fool experts for generations. Dorchester Pot. Imagine the earth-shaking boom of black powder splitting ancient rock, the acrid smell of smoke filling the air, and chunks of stone flying in every direction. You're standing on Meeting House Hill in Dorchester, Massachusetts, watching workmen clear land for construction. It's June 1851, and industrial progress demands that this stubborn hill give way to human ambition. Then, as the dust settles and workers begin sorting through the debris, someone spots something that doesn't belong, something that will challenge everything scientists thought they knew about deep time and human history. This is how the Dorchester Pot entered the world, emerging from solid rock in pieces, carrying with it questions that would puzzle researchers for generations. The story begins with a routine construction project. Workmen needed to clear Meeting House Hill, just a few rods south of Reverend Mr. Hall's meeting house, to make way for development in the growing town of Dorchester. The hill presented a significant obstacle composed of what geologists call pudding stone, a type of conglomerate rock formed millions of years ago when pebbles and sand were cemented together under immense pressure and time. Breaking up this ancient rock required the most powerful tool available in 1851, black powder explosives. The workmen carefully placed their charges, lit the fuses and stepped back to watch the blast do its work. When the smoke cleared and the debris stopped falling, they began the tedious process of clearing away the shattered stone. Among the scattered fragments of rock, workers discovered something extraordinary. Two pieces of what appeared to be a metallic vessel lay among the debris, clearly thrown out by the explosion. The pieces fit together perfectly, forming a bell-shaped pot that stood 412 in high, with a base diameter of 612 in, tapering to 212 in at the top. The vessel's appearance was striking. The metal resembled zinc alloyed with silver, giving it a distinctive coloration. But what truly caught attention were the decorative elements. 6 floral designs or bouquets were beautifully inlaid with pure silver on the sides of the vessel. Around the lower portion, a vine or wreath pattern, also inlaid with silver, completed the ornate decoration. The craftsmanship suggested the work of a skilled artisan. This wasn't crude metal work or some accidental formation. Every detail spoke of deliberate artistic intent and considerable technical ability. The inlay work particularly impressed observers as it required sophisticated metallurgical knowledge to execute properly. The Scientific American picked up the story and published an account that would spread the discovery far beyond Massachusetts. According to their report, the position where the pieces were found indicated that the vessel had been blasted from solid rock approximately 15 ft below the surface of the hill. This detail would prove crucial to the mystery that followed. The geological implications were staggering. The pudding stone of Meeting House Hill belonged to what geologists now call the Roxbury conglomerate, formed during the Precambrian era between 570 and 593 million years ago. During that ancient period, the area lay at the bottom of a deep rift basin filled with marine water. Sediments accumulated in submarine fan and slope environments, eventually forming the rock that would later be metamorphosis into the conglomerate the workmen were blasting. If the vessel truly came from this ancient rock formation, it suggested that skilled metal workers were creating decorative objects hundreds of millions of years before conventional science placed the first appearance of complex life on Earth. The timeline didn't just challenge accepted theories about human development, it obliterated them entirely. But the mystery deepened when experts began examining the find more closely. The metallurgy alone raised questions. The zinc-silver alloy and the sophisticated inlay work suggested knowledge of advanced smelting and decorative techniques. Such skills supposedly developed only within recorded human history, not in some prehistoric civilization that predated multicellular life. Skeptics immediately began proposing alternative explanations. Some suggested that the vessel had worked its way down through cracks or fissures in the rock over time. Perhaps it was a relatively recent object that had somehow migrated deep into the hillside through natural geological processes. Others questioned the workman's account entirely. Could the pieces have been present in the debris from some other source? Might they have been? Scientists for over a century and turn your quiet drilling operation into one of Archae's most debated mysteries. This is exactly what happened to Mark A. Kurtz on a blazing July day when his fingers first touched what would become known as the Nampa image. The case file opens in 1887. James A. Penny, Nathan Falk, Joseph Perrault, John Bernard, and Mark Kurtz formed a partnership with one simple goal: find artesian water for the growing frontier settlement of Nampa, Idaho was still wild territory, a place where fortune seekers and settlers carved out new lives from unforgiving landscape. Water meant survival, and artesian wells promised a steady supply without the back-breaking work of hauling buckets from distant sources. By July 1889, their steam-powered sand pump had been grinding away for nearly 2 years. The operation was methodical, almost monotonous. Day after day, the pump drove deeper into the earth, pulling up loads of clay, sand, and rock. At 320 ft below the surface, they were working in geological layers that hadn't seen sunlight for millions of years. Mark Kurtz stood at his usual position, running the pump's output through his hands, checking for anything unusual that might indicate they were close to hitting water. The routine had become second nature. Grab a handful of material, examine it, toss it aside, repeat. On this particular day, something felt different. Kurtz later described the moment. I had the clay image in my hand and supposed it was a twig, but when he looked closer, his assumption crumbled. This wasn't organic debris from the surface. This was a carefully crafted human figure about 1 1/2 in tall, made of fired clay and stained red-brown. possibly from iron oxide in the surrounding sediment. The figurine displayed unmistakable signs of human craftsmanship. Every detail suggested deliberate artistry. The proportioned body, the careful attention to clothing details, the way the clay had been shaped and fired. This wasn't a natural formation or accidental clay compression. Someone with skill and artistic vision had created this small sculpture. But here's where the detective work gets interesting. The geological evidence suggested this figurine came from a depth that should predate human presence in North America by millions of years. The strata at 320 FT belonged to the late Tertiary or early Quaternary period, making any human artifact impossibly ancient, according to accepted scientific understanding. Word of the discovery spread quickly through scientific circles. Charles F. Adams, president of the Union Pacific Railroad, brought the find to national attention. During a trip to Alaska, Adams had been reading a book about the Ice Age by Professor G. Frederick Wright of Olin College. The railroad executive was intrigued enough to contact Wright directly about the NA discovery. Professor Wright became the lead investigator in this scientific mystery. As a respected geologist and archaeologist, Wright understood the explosive implications of the find. If authentic, the NA image would rewrite everything. Scientists believed about human migration to the Americas and the development of pottery-making skills. At the general meeting of the Boston Society of Natural History on January 1, 1890, President F.W. Putnam called upon Wright to present his findings about the Nampa image. The scientific community was buzzing with questions and theories. How could such an artifact exist at that depth? Was it genuine, or had something gone wrong with the investigation? Wright examined every aspect of the discovery with methodical precision. He studied the drilling equipment, interviewed the workers, and analyzed the geological layers. The steam-powered sand pump operated by forcing water down a pipe, then sucking up the loosened material. This process made it nearly impossible for surface objects to work their way down to such depths during the drilling operation. The skeptics lined up with their theories. Some suggested the image was a deliberate hoax perpetrated by the drilling crew. Others proposed that it was a modern Native American toy that had somehow fallen into a natural crack or fissure and worked its way down through the geological layers over time. Holmes, a prominent archaeologist, examined the figurine and raised several objections. He questioned whether such an object could actually originate from those ancient geological layers. Holmes suggested the image might have been introduced through a crevice or fault in the rock, allowing it to reach such depths without actually being ancient. But Wright's investigation revealed problems with these explanations. The sand pump's operation made contamination from above virtually impossible. The geological layers showed no evidence of major fissures or cracks that could allow a surface object to migrate downward. The condition of the figurine itself suggested long burial in the specific clay and sand mixture found at that depth. Major Powell, the famous explorer, entered the debate with his own theory. He suggested the image was simply a modern Native American toy. Nothing more mysterious than that. However, other experts pointed out that local tribes weren't known for making such fired clay figurines. The artistic style and construction technique didn't match regional Native American pottery traditions. Another investigator, a Mr. McGee, went further and directly accused Kurtz and his partner Duffs of fabricating the entire story. McGee suggested they had planted the figurine to create publicity or perhaps to increase interest in their drilling operation. But this accusation faced its own problems. The drilling crew had no apparent motive for such deception. They weren't seeking fame or trying to sell anything, they were simply trying to dig a well for their community. Albert Allen Wright, a professor of natural history at Oberlin, conducted his own examination of the figurine. He concluded that while it would be possible to create a duplicate that appeared aged, doing so would require sophisticated knowledge of chemistry and geology that seemed unlikely among frontier drilling crews. The physical evidence continued to puzzle investigators. The figurine showed signs of long burial in the specific type of sediment found at that depth. Iron oxide staining had penetrated deep into the clay, suggesting extended contact with the iron-rich geological environment. The surface weathering patterns matched what would be expected from centuries or millennia of underground burial. Wright documented every detail of his investigation, publishing his findings in the prestigious proceedings of the Boston Society of Natural History. His reports included detailed descriptions of the drilling operation, geological analysis of the site, and careful examination of the figurine itself. The mystery deepened when other investigators tried to replicate the discovery conditions. The specific type of clay, the mineral staining, the degree of weathering, all these factors would be extremely difficult to fake convincingly, especially by frontier workers with limited scientific knowledge. Yet the implications remained staggering. If the NEA image was genuine, it suggested either that humans had been present in North America far earlier than any evidence supported, or that the geological dating of the site was completely wrong. Both possibilities challenged fundamental assumptions of 19th century science. The case remained open with evidence pointing in multiple directions. The physical artifact supported authenticity, but the geological context seemed impossible. The circumstances of discovery appeared genuine, but the implications defied scientific understanding. As investigators dug deeper into the mystery, they uncovered a puzzle that refused to yield simple answers, leaving future scientists to wrestle with questions that challenged everything they thought they knew about human history and geological time. Crystal skulls. Imagine walking into a dusty Parisian antique shop in 1878 where exotic treasures from distant lands fill every corner. Behind glass cases, Aztec masks stare back at you. Maya jade ornaments catch the light. And there, gleaming like captured starlight, sits a perfect human skull carved from pure crystal. The shopkeeper tells you it's ancient, created by mysterious pre-Columbian civilizations with secrets lost to time. You're looking at what would become one of archaeology's most enduring mysteries. This is where our journey begins. Not in the jungles of Central America or the temples of ancient Mexico, but in the sophisticated salons of 19th century Europe, where a French dealer named Eugene Bobin was about to change the course of archaeological history forever. The year 1856 marks the first recorded appearance of a crystal skull in a European collection. The British Museum acquired a small specimen barely an inch high, though no one recorded exactly where it came from. This tiny carved skull would be the first of many to surface in museums and private collections across Europe and America over the following decades. But it was at the 1878 Paris World's Fair where crystal skulls truly captured public attention. Bobin, a charismatic antiquities dealer who had spent his youth in Mexico collecting artifacts and exotic birds, displayed an impressive collection of pre-Columbian treasures. Among them was a life-sized crystal skull that mesmerized visitors with its perfect human proportions and flawless crystal clarity. Bobin's story reads like an adventure novel. Born into humble circumstances in Paris in 1834, he traveled to California during the gold rush as a teenager, then made his way to Mexico where he fell in love with the ancient civilizations that had once ruled there. He established himself as an expert on pre-Columbian artifacts, building a successful business, selling archaeological treasures to European and American collectors hungry for exotic antiquities. Intensively by paleontologists for decades, thousands of dinosaur tracks have been documented and verified, providing an incredibly detailed picture of Cretaceous life in Texas. Yet, among all these authentic fossils, the only alleged human evidence comes from a single loose specimen with no documented excavation history. Meanwhile, just down the river at Dinosaur Valley State Park, visitors can walk along the same limestone beds and see authentic dinosaur footprints preserved exactly as they were discovered. These tracks show clear evidence of their formation process, with defined pressure ridges, proper depth variation, and consistent aging throughout the rock matrix. The handprint controversy reflects a larger debate about how we interpret evidence from the deep past. Natural rock formations can create incredibly convincing impressions that resemble biological features. Pareidolia, our tendency to see familiar patterns in random shapes, can make us perceive hands, faces, or other recognizable forms in natural rock textures. Yet questions remain that keep this discovery alive in archaeological discussions. If this is indeed a natural formation or a modern creation, why does it show such specific anatomical details? The supposed thumbnail impression, the webbing between fingers, and the varying depth of different digits all seem remarkably consistent with how a real hand might press into soft sediment. The location itself adds another layer of mystery. The Glen Rose area has produced some of the most significant paleontological discoveries in North America. The limestone formations here preserve incredible detail, capturing everything from dinosaur skin impressions to delicate plant fossils. If any location could preserve a human handprint from the Cretaceous period, this would be it, Morrisonville Chain. Think about the most bizarre thing you could find while doing mundane household chores. Maybe a $20 bill in an old jacket pocket or your grandmother's jewelry in a forgotten drawer. But what if you cracked open a lump of coal for your morning fire and found a delicate gold chain nestled inside, untouched by time, sitting in rock that formed before the first tree even existed? This exact scenario unfolded in 1891 in a small Illinois town, creating one of archaeology's most puzzling mysteries. Let me tell you something that will challenge everything. You think you know about how coal forms and what it should contain. On a quiet Tuesday morning, June 9, 1891, Mrs. Nina Maxon Culp was going about her usual routine in Morrisonville, Illinois. Like most households of that era, the Culp family relied on coal for heating and cooking. Na grabbed her trusty shovel and began breaking apart a chunk of coal that had been delivered from either the nearby Taylorville or Panamanies. The coal split apart with a familiar crack that every housewife of the time knew well. But this time, something extraordinary happened. Embedded deep within the black fossil fuel was a delicate gold chain coiled in a perfect circle, its ends meeting as if someone had carefully arranged it centuries ago. Nina examined the chain closely. It measured exactly 10 in length and weighed 12 gri. When she took it to her husband, Silas, who happened to be a jeweler, he confirmed what seemed impossible. This wasn't some cheap trinket or accident of nature. The chain was made of genuine 8-carat gold, crafted with the precision that only human hands could achieve. The local newspaper, the Morrisonville Times, published this discovery on June 11, 1891. Silas Culp, who owned the paper, described how the chain had occupied a circular hollow in the coal, with both ends placed close together and completely contained within the lump. The coal had to be broken open to reveal this hidden treasure. Now here's where this story gets really interesting and where every reasonable explanation starts to fall apart. Coal from the Illinois basin formed during the Permian period of the Carboniferous era, roughly 300 million years ago. This was a time when vast swamp forests covered much of what would become the American Midwest. Giant ferns towered overhead, primitive amphibians splashed through steamy waters, and the first winged insects buzzed through humid air. The climate was tropical, and enormous amounts of plant material accumulated in these ancient wetlands. Over millions of years, layers of sediment buried these plant remains. Pressure and heat slowly transformed the organic matter into the coal that would later heat American homes. This process, called coalification, creates a time capsule. The coal preserves the chemical signature of those ancient forests, complete with fossilized plant remains and occasionally the impression of prehistoric creatures. But here's what makes the Morrisonville chain so baffling. Humans didn't exist 300 million years ago. In fact, mammals were tiny creatures hiding from giant reptiles. The first primitive primates wouldn't appear for another 240 million years. Modern humans wouldn't walk the Earth for another 299.8 million years after this coal formed. Yet, Nina Culp held in her hands a piece of sophisticated metal work that could only have been created by skilled human craftsmen. The skeptics have their explanations, of course. They point out that late 19th century newspapers were notorious for publishing sensational stories without proper verification. The Morrisonville Times was a small-town paper owned by the husband of the woman who made the discovery. Silas Culp, being a jeweler, would have had access to gold chains and the knowledge to stage such a finding. Some suggest that coal naturally develops cracks and fissures over time, and that a modern chain could have worked its way into an existing cavity. Others propose that the coal might have been previously broken and the chain inserted before being sold to the Culps. But these explanations require their own leap of faith. They assume that Silas and Nina Culp were willing to fabricate an elaborate hoax for what purpose? Local fame. The tiny Morrisonville Times wasn't exactly a platform for national attention. The couple weren't seeking financial gain from their discovery. They simply reported what appeared to be an impossible find. Moreover, coal doesn't easily develop the kind of hollow spaces that would perfectly accommodate a coiled chain. The fossilization process creates rock-hard material with very little internal space. For a chain to work its way into fresh coal would require the kind of pressure and heat that would likely damage or destroy delicate metal work. The chain itself presents another puzzle. 8-carat gold indicates a specific alloy that contains exactly 1/3 pure gold mixed with other metals. This wasn't random metal working. Someone with considerable skill had crafted this chain using techniques that require knowledge of metallurgy and access to proper tools and materials. The preservation is equally mysterious. Gold doesn't tarnish or corrode easily, which explains why the chain remained in good condition. But how did organic materials around it transform into coal while leaving this metal object untouched? The chemical processes that create coal are intense enough to alter the molecular structure of organic matter. Yet somehow this delicate chain survived unscathed. No photographs of the original chain exist today. The artifact has vanished into history, leaving only the newspaper account and the questions it raises. Without physical evidence to examine, modern science cannot analyze the metal composition, study the craftsmanship, or determine the chain's actual age. This disappearance feeds both sides of the controversy. Believers argue that the chain was too threatening to establish scientific thinking and was deliberately suppressed. Skeptics suggest that the lack of physical evidence supports their theory that no chain ever existed. The Morrisonville discovery wasn't unique. Throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, miners across America reported finding manufactured objects embedded in coal seams. Bells, nails, metal spheres, and other artifacts allegedly emerged from deposits millions of years old. Some of these reports came from reputable sources, while others originated from questionable characters seeking attention or profit. What makes the cult chain different is the straightforward nature of the account. Nina wasn't a publicity seeker or a charlatan selling miracle cures. She was a housewife doing mundane chores who stumbled upon something that challenged the foundations of geological science. The implications remain staggering. If authentic, this single gold chain rewrites our understanding of human history, coal formation, and the age of intelligent life on Earth. It suggests that either our timeline of human development is completely wrong, or that the processes creating coal work differently than we believe. Yet the chain sits in that frustrating space where extraordinary claims meet ordinary evidence. The story persists because it can neither be definitively proven nor completely debunked. In the absence of the actual artifact, we're left to weigh the credibility of a small-town newspaper against the entire framework of geological science. The Morrisonville chain forces us to confront an uncomfortable question about the nature of evidence and belief. Sometimes the most puzzling discoveries are not the ones that fit neatly into our understanding of the world, but the ones that refuse to disappear despite having no place in our version of reality. N.A. Picture this. You're digging for water in the scorching summer heat of 1889, your steam-moored pump chugging away, spitting out chunks of clay and sand from hundreds of feet underground. The frontier town of Nampa, Idaho, desperately needs a reliable water source.
And you're part of the crew making it happen.
Then your hand closes around something that shouldn't exist, something that will puzzle. Creating a surface with the consistency of wet cement, various animals walked across this surface, leaving tracks. Then another light dusting of ash covered the prints, sealing them before they could erode. Over millions of years, the ash hardened into rock, preserving the footprints as fossil impressions. What made these particular tracks extraordinary wasn't just their age, it was what they revealed about the creatures that made them. The footprints showed clear evidence of bipedal locomotion, walking on two legs. At 3.6 million years old, they represented the earliest direct evidence of upright walking in human ancestors. Mary Leakey's team uncovered a trail stretching nearly 90 ft, containing prints from at least 3 individuals. The most famous trackway, designated Trail G, shows what appears to be a family group. 2 adults and a child walking together across the ancient landscape. The larger individuals' prints measure about 8.5 in long, the smaller adults about 6.5 in, and the child's roughly 4 in. But here's where the scientific paradox emerges. While everyone agrees these prints show bipedal walking, researchers have spent 40 years arguing about almost everything else. How exactly were these ancient humans walking? What do the prints tell us about their anatomy? Were they walking like modern humans or in some fundamentally different way? Initial analyses suggested the LI walkers moved much like we do today, with a fully upright posture, heel-to-toe gait, and efficient stride pattern. This interpretation supported the idea that human-like walking evolved very early in our lineage, millions of years before our brains enlarged significantly. However, later studies using more sophisticated analytical techniques painted a different picture. Researchers found that the footprint makers likely walked with a more crouched posture than modern humans. Their feet may have been flatter with less pronounced arches. The stride patterns showed subtle but important differences from contemporary human walking. Some scientists argue the prints reveal a unique form of locomotion, not quite like modern human walking, but not like any other primate's movement either. This suggests our ancestors developed their own distinctive way of getting around, one that evolved over millions of years into the efficient striding gait we use today. The debate gets more complex when researchers try to identify exactly which species made these tracks. Most scientists attribute them to Australopithecus afarensis, the same species that includes the famous fossil skeleton Lucy, found in Ethiopia just a few years before the Lee discovery. But even this seemingly straightforward identification faces challenges. Recent excavations at LII have uncovered additional footprint sites with tracks that appear different from the original Trail G. Some of these newer prints are larger and show different gait characteristics, suggesting multiple hominin species might have been living in the same area at the same time. This possibility complicates the simple story of early human evolution that the original lay tracks seem to tell. The preservation of the prints themselves presents another puzzle. While the volcanic ash theory explains how the footprints could be preserved, some researchers question whether this process could really capture the fine details visible. In many of the tracks, they point out that experimental attempts to recreate similar conditions haven't produced prints with the same level of detail. Modern technology continues to reveal new information about these ancient tracks. 3D scanning and advanced imaging techniques show features that earlier researchers missed. Some prints contain evidence of toe impressions and heel strikes that weren't visible in earlier studies. These details provide new data for ongoing debates about ancient walking patterns. The footprints also raise questions about early human behavior and social structure. The apparent family group walking together suggests these ancient ancestors lived in social units and traveled as groups. But interpreting social behavior from footprints requires making assumptions that many scientists find problematic. Despite decades of study, the Lati footprints continue to generate new questions and conflicting interpretations. Each new analytical technique reveals additional details, but also raises fresh debates about what those details actually mean. The tracks remain a powerful piece of evidence for early bipedalism, but they've proven far more complex to interpret than anyone expected when Mary Leakey first uncovered them. The prints sit preserved under protective buildings at the site, slowly degrading despite conservation efforts. Time may be running out to extract all possible information from these remarkable fossils, leaving future generations to wonder what secrets we might have missed in our rush to understand our own origins. Fossilized human hand. Picture this moment. You're standing knee-deep in the muddy waters of the Plexi River near Glen Rose, Texas, surrounded by limestone ledges that stretch back 110 million years. The sun beats down on your back as you lean closer to examine what looks like impossible evidence carved into the ancient rock. Your heart pounds as you realize you might be looking at something that challenges everything we know about human history. This is exactly what happened in 1995 near Weatherford, Texas, when a discovery emerged that would ignite fierce debates in the scientific community. We're talking about what appears to be a fossilized human handprint pressed into Cretaceous limestone, rock that formed during the age of dinosaurs, long before humans supposedly walked the earth. Let me take you on this journey to understand what makes this discovery so controversial and why it sits at the center of one of archaeology's most heated disputes. The Glen Rose Formation tells an incredible story. This limestone layer was formed during the Cretaceous period, when this part of Texas lay beneath a shallow tropical sea. Massive. Marine reptiles swam overhead while dinosaurs left their footprints along the muddy shorelines. The University of Texas has dated this rock formation to approximately 108 to 113 million years old. That's a time when flowering plants were just beginning to appear on Earth, and mammals were tiny creatures hiding from giant predators. Carl Bohr, founder of the Creation Evidence Museum in Glen Rose, has spent decades excavating this area. His museum sits just miles from Dinosaur Valley State Park, where thousands of authentic dinosaur tracks draw visitors from around the world. But Bohr's focus has been on something far more controversial. He claims to have uncovered evidence that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. The handprint in question sits on a loose block of limestone, carefully preserved in Bee's museum. When you examine it closely, the detail is remarkable. The impression shows what appears to be a human hand with clearly defined fingers, a thumb, and even what looks like the webbing between the thumb and index finger. The supposed middle finger appears to have penetrated deeper into the ancient mud, creating a distinctive impression that Bohr argues could only have been made by a living human hand. The limestone itself tells a story of violent geological forces. During the formation of this rock, massive slabs were ripped from their prehistoric foundations, slammed together and shattered by unimaginable pressures. The locals who first discovered dinosaur tracks in this area had no idea they were walking across one of the most significant fossil sites in North America. But here's where the journey takes a fascinating turn. When scientists examine this handprint, they see something completely different than what Bohr claims. Paleontologist Glenn Kubin, who has spent years studying the Glen Rose formations, examined the loose slab in person at Bohr's museum. His trained eye detected something troubling. Parts of the impression, particularly on the right side, looked natural, as if they were formed by geological processes rather than biological ones. Even more concerning, other sections appeared to show signs of human enhancement. The possibility emerged that this might have started as a natural rock formation that coincidentally resembled part of a human hand, which was then carved and extended to create a more convincing
Handprint. This wouldn't be the first time that
natural rock formations have been mistaken for or deliberately altered to resemble biological impressions. The controversy deepens when you consider the burden of proof required for such an extraordinary claim. If humans really did exist 110 million years ago, It would completely rewrite our understanding of evolution, geology, and the history of life on Earth. Such a discovery would require exceptional evidence, documented excavation procedures, and independent verification by multiple scientific institutions. Yet, no photographs exist showing this handprint in its original position within the rock formation. There's no documentation of its excavation, no soil samples from the surrounding matrix, and no independent scientific analysis of the limestone composition. The handprint exists as a loose specimen, separated from any geological context that could help verify its authenticity. This isn't the first questionable discovery from the Glen Rose area. During his initial excavation in 1982, Bohr promoted another alleged handprint found behind a local property. This marking was described as shallow and ambiguous, appearing on a coarse surface that made detailed analysis nearly impossible. Even among B's supporters, this earlier discovery attracted little attention and was quietly abandoned. The scientific community has remained skeptical of these claims, pointing out that extraordinary discoveries require extraordinary evidence. The Glen Rose Formation has been studied. What if everything we know about human history is wrong? Hidden in museums, buried in archives, and dismissed by mainstream science are 27 archaeological discoveries that don't fit the official story. Artifacts that shouldn't exist. Human remains where no human should be. Technology from impossible time periods. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are documented finds with physical evidence that science refuses to explain. The Kensington Runestone. Imagine a crisp October day in 1898 when a farmer is clearing his land. For almost 2 decades, Swedish immigrant Olof Öhman had been cultivating his land close to Kensington, Minnesota. He and his young son were removing an old aspenry from the ground when they noticed something. A big flat stone with odd carved marks was entangled in the roots. The slab of grey sandstone weighed more than 200 lb and stood 30 in tall. However, one of the most persistent debates in archaeology would be sparked by the enigmatic symbols engraved on its surface. Öhman showed his neighbor the stone, and he identified the markings as runes, the Vikings' ancient alphabet. Scholars from the area were summoned to investigate what seemed to be a remarkable discovery. When translated, the inscription revealed a remarkable tale. It asserted that in 1362, more than a century before Columbus arrived in the New World, 30 Norse explorers had ventured far into North America. We are 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on an exploration journey from Vinland through the west, the translation said, sounding like an old-fashioned adventure story. After traveling north for a day from this stone, we set up camp by 2 skerries. We were out and fished one day. After we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and dead. Ave Maria, save us from evil. The message continued on the stone's edge, adding even more drama. Have 10 men by the sea to look after our ship's 14 days journey from this island. Year 1362, if genuine, this stone would rewrite American history. It suggested that Vikings had not only reached the continent centuries before other Europeans, but had traveled far inland, establishing temporary camps and exploring the Minnesota wilderness. For a region populated largely by Scandinavian immigrants, the discovery couldn't have been more exciting. But within months of the find, experts began raising serious questions. George Flom, a professor of Scandinavian languages at the University of Illinois, examined the stone in 1910 and declared it a modern fake. He pointed to several problems with the runic text. The inscription mixed different runic alphabets from various time periods. In Scandinavia during the Middle Ages, some of the letter forms were completely contemporary. The grammar contained mistakes that no 14th century Norseman would have made. The stone supporters, however, refused to back down. They argued that isolated Viking explorers might have developed their own variations of runic writing over time. Perhaps the mixing of alphabets reflected the diverse backgrounds of the expedition members. Local historians pointed out that Öhman was a simple farmer with little education. Surely, he couldn't have created such an elaborate hoax. As decades passed, new voices joined the debate. Some defenders claimed the inscription showed evidence of a secret code used by medieval knights. Others suggested the stone marked the path of Viking expeditions searching for the new lands beyond Greenland. Archaeological investigations around the discovery site found iron fragments that believers claimed came from medieval tools left by the Norse visitors. The controversy intensified rather than faded. In the 1960s and 70s, fresh studies using modern techniques were conducted on the stone. Some researchers found evidence of weathering patterns that suggested the inscriptions were indeed old. Others discovered tool marks that appeared consistent with 19th century carving methods. Geological analysis became a new battleground. Supporters pointed to lichen growth on the carved surfaces as evidence of age. Critics responded that lichen could establish itself on fresh cuts within just a few years under the right conditions. Chemical studies of the stone surface produced conflicting results that each side interpreted as supporting their position. The debate took on cultural dimensions that went far beyond archaeology. For Minnesota's large Scandinavian American community, the stone represented validation of their heritage's importance in American history. Museums displayed it prominently. Local festivals celebrated the supposed Viking connection. The stone became a source of regional pride and tourist revenue. Meanwhile, mainstream scholars remained largely unconvinced. They pointed to the suspicious timing of the discovery, coming at a moment when Scandinavian immigrants were seeking greater recognition of their cultural contributions. The inscription's language problems seemed too numerous to dismiss. No other archaeological evidence had been found to support a Viking presence so far inland. In recent decades, new defenders have emerged with increasingly sophisticated arguments. They've conducted detailed studies of the stone's weathering patterns, analyzed the grammar using medieval linguistic principles, and searched for supporting evidence in other archaeological sites across North America. Their research has filled hundreds of pages, creating an impressive body of scholarship that continues to challenge the hoax theory. Yet, for every piece of evidence supporting authenticity, critics have found alternative explanations rooted in 19th century fraud. The mystery deepens with each new analysis as modern technology reveals details invisible to earlier investigators. The Kensington Runestone sits today in a Minnesota museum, its true origins as hotly debated as ever. After more than a century of investigation, this carved stone continues to divide experts and challenge our assumptions about who first explored the American heartland.
Michigan relics.
In a small workshop in southwestern Michigan, James Scotford bent over his workbench, carefully chiseling strange symbols into a piece of slate. The year was 1890, and across 17 counties, thousands of similar artifacts would soon emerge from the earth, each one bearing mysterious inscriptions that mixed Hebrew letters with hieroglyphs and unknown scripts. For decades, respected scholars would examine these objects and declare them proof that ancient Mediterranean civilizations had reached America long before Columbus. It would become one of Archae's most successful hoaxes. The accepted story begins with the discovery itself. James Scotford, a sign painter by trade, claimed he found his first artifact while digging a well near his home in Mont County. The small clay tablet bore inscriptions that appeared to be ancient Hebrew mixed with other symbols. Word spread quickly through local communities, and soon Scotford was finding more artifacts. His partner, Daniel Soper, a former Michigan Secretary of State, helped market the discoveries to collectors and museums across the country. By the early 1900s, the Michigan Relics collection had grown to include thousands of pieces: stone tablets, copper plates, clay figurines, and ceremonial cups all surfaced from farms and construction sites throughout the state. The inscriptions told remarkable stories of ancient voyages, religious ceremonies, and established settlements. Many artifacts bore images of elephants, lions, and other animals unknown to pre-Columbian America. Alongside Hebrew texts that seemed to describe biblical events occurring in the New World, academic experts initially embraced the finds. The sheer volume of discoveries impressed even skeptical scholars.
How could two men create such an extensive collection of fakes?
The inscriptions, while unusual, contained elements that appeared genuinely ancient. Several university professors authenticated pieces in their collections, and museums proudly displayed the artifacts as evidence of early Hebrew settlement in America. But in 1908, University of Michigan professor Francis Kelsey began a systematic investigation that would expose the entire operation. Working with University of Pennsylvania linguist Morris Jastrow, Kelsey examined hundreds of artifacts and found troubling patterns. The Hebrew inscriptions contained grammatical errors that no ancient scribe would make. The hieroglyphic symbols were mixed randomly with no regard for proper Egyptian writing conventions. Most damning, many pieces showed clear evidence of modern tool marks. Kelsey and Jastrow published their findings, calling the Michigan relics a horrible mixture of jumbled ancient
Scripts created by someone with no real
knowledge of ancient languages. They demonstrated how the artifacts had been artificially aged and planted at discovery sites. The academic consensus quickly shifted, and mainstream archaeology dismissed the entire collection as an elaborate fraud. Yet this official debunking did not end the story. A dedicated group of believers emerged, arguing that the scholarly establishment had rushed to judgment. They pointed out that many artifacts had been found by independent witnesses with no connection to Scotford or Soper. How could the two hoaxers have orchestrated finds across such a wide geographic area? Some supporters suggested the inscriptions represented a lost dialect of Hebrew evolved during centuries of isolation in the Americas. Modern defenders have raised more sophisticated questions about the mainstream dismissal. They note that carbon dating was not available when Kelsey conducted his investigation, and that chemical analysis of the artifacts has produced mixed results. Some tests suggest the inscriptions are indeed much older than the 1890s. Supporters also point to similar artifacts found in other states, arguing that the Michigan discoveries are part of a larger pattern of ancient Hebrew presence in North